I woke up in the intensive care unit to the agonizing beep of a heart monitor, my spine fractured from a horrific morning car crash. Instead of finding my parents crying by my bedside, I heard the distinct rolling of their designer luggage. They were leaving for San Diego to attend my brother Marcus's app launch party, the exact same app I had quietly funded. I spent 7 days completely immobilized and utterly abandoned until a nurse showed me the hospital security footage. A mysterious woman had stood outside my door every single night, and when I finally recognized her face, my entire world shattered. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who completely underestimated your worth. The first thing I registered was the blinding fluorescent light burning through my eyelids. Then came the rhythmic, piercing sound of the heart monitor echoing in the sterile room. I tried to sit up to instinctively rub the sleep from my eyes, but a sharp, suffocating agony shot through my entire body. I could not move. My neck and torso were locked in a rigid, heavy brace. Panic flared in my chest as the memories of the morning rushed back. The screeching tires at 7:30. The crushing impact of metal twisting around me. The terrifying darkness that followed. As my vision slowly adjusted to the harsh hospital lighting, I expected to see my parents huddled beside my bed, their faces lined with worry and relief that I had survived. Instead, the sound that cut through the steady beeping of the machines was not a sob or a comforting whisper. It was the smooth, unmistakable hum of polyurethane wheels rolling across linoleum. I managed to turn my eyes just enough to see the foot of my bed. My mother, Patricia, and my father, Lawrence, were standing there. But they were not wearing the wrinkled throw-on clothes of terrified parents who had rushed to the emergency room. My mother was dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit, her signature pearls resting perfectly against her collarbone. My father was adjusting the cuffs of his expensive blazer, checking his gold watch with a look of severe impatience. Beside them sat two large matching designer suitcases. "Mom," I managed to whisper, my voice raspy and weak from the breathing tube they had recently removed. My throat felt like it was coated in shattered glass. "Dad, what is going on?" My mother paused, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from her jacket before finally making eye contact with me. Her expression was completely devoid of maternal warmth. "Maya, you are awake," she said casually, as if I had just returned from a quick nap rather than a near-fatal collision. "The doctor assured us you are going to be fine. You just have a fractured vertebra. The nurses will take good care of you. We really have to get moving." I blinked, my brain struggling to process her words through the heavy fog of pain medication. "Get moving, where are you going?" "I was just in a severe car accident. I cannot even move my legs." My father let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. Maya tried to be understanding. "We have to drive down to San Diego immediately. Marcus is hosting his official launch party for the new application tonight. Chloe and her entire family are already waiting for us at the resort. We simply cannot miss your brother's big moment. He needs our support." The audacity of his statement felt like a second physical blow, hitting me harder than the airbag had. "I am lying in an intensive care unit with a broken spine." I croaked, the pain in my chest intensifying with every word. "And you are leaving me here alone to go to a party for the very application that I financed." It was true. As a venture capitalist, I had spent years building my wealth from the ground up, navigating a ruthless industry where women who looked like me had to work 10 times harder just to get a seat at the table. When Marcus came to me with a half-baked idea and zero capital, I was the one who structured his business plan. I was the one who quietly funneled a massive amount of my own money into his startup so he could play the role of a brilliant tech founder. I had handed him his success on a silver platter because that was what my parents demanded of me. They had conditioned me my entire life to be the reliable bank for their golden boy. My mother crossed her arms, her lips thinning into a familiar line of irritation. "Oh, please, Maya, do not start with this narrative again. You have always been so resentful of your brother's spotlight. You helped him out a little bit with some startup cash, but it is his genius that built this company. We are a family, and family supports each other. You should be proud of him, instead of making this tragic situation all about you." Before I could muster the strength to argue back, a shadow fell over the doorway. It was Chloe, my sister-in-law. She leaned against the doorframe checking her flawless manicure. Chloe came from a wealthy, connected white family, and she never missed an opportunity to subtly remind us of her perceived superiority. She looked at me lying there broken and immobilized and let out a soft, mocking laugh. "Let us go, Patricia," Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Stop engaging with her. Maya, honestly, you need to stop being such a drama queen. You survived the crash, so you are fine. Marcus has been working himself to the bone to make this launch perfect, and my father has invited some major investors. You throwing a few pennies at him in the beginning does not make you the owner. The company is Marcus's hard work. Do not try to ruin his special night just because you are jealous and stuck in a hospital bed." I stared at her, then shifted my gaze to my parents, waiting for them to defend me, waiting for them to tell this woman to show some respect to their daughter who was lying in the intensive care unit. But my father just grabbed the handles of their suitcases. "Chloe is right," Lawrence said briskly. "The investors are waiting. We will call the nursing station tomorrow to check on your progress. Rest up, Maya." My mother did not even step closer to the bed to touch my hand. She simply adjusted her purse strap and nodded. "Try not to give the hospital staff a hard time, Maya. We will see you when we get back." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I was cutting them off, that I was freezing the accounts, that I would take back every single thing I had ever given them. But my body betrayed me. The medication pulled me down into a dark, heavy silence, rendering my vocal cords useless. I could only watch through blurring tears of rage and disbelief. The three of them turned their backs on me without a second glance. The rolling of their expensive suitcases echoed down the quiet hospital corridor, fading away until there was nothing left but the oppressive rhythmic beep of my heart monitor. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room clicked shut, sealing me inside. I was completely paralyzed, entirely alone, and the realization hit me with terrifying clarity. In my family's eyes, I was not a daughter. I was just an ATM they could casually discard the moment I stopped dispensing cash. The first 24 hours after that door clicked shut were a masterclass in denial. Lying paralyzed in the sterile glow of the intensive care unit, my fractured spine encased in a rigid halo brace, I convinced myself that my parents would turn the car around. I reasoned that my mother, despite her lifelong obsession with social climbing and appearances, would suddenly feel a pang of maternal guilt halfway to San Diego. I told myself that my father would pull over, look at his phone, and realize he could not leave his badly injured daughter to face spinal surgery alone. But the hours bled into days, and the silence in my hospital room became louder than the relentless beeping of the machinery keeping watch over my fragile vital signs. 7 days passed, 168 hours of staring at the exact same stained ceiling tile above my bed. During that agonizing week, the physical torment of a shattered spine gradually took a back seat to a much deeper, more insidious agony. The nurses rotated shifts, bathing me, adjusting my IV lines, and whispering sympathetic words that only magnified my humiliation. They knew. The entire floor knew that the woman in room 4 had been left completely unattended. Every time the heavy door swung open, my eyes darted toward the frame, foolishly expecting to see my brother Marcus rushing in with an apology or my mother carrying a bouquet of guilt flowers. Instead, it was always just another medical professional holding a clipboard. On the afternoon of the 7th day, the physical therapist finally cleared me to have limited use of my hands. My regular attending nurse, a kind woman named Sarah, retrieved my personal belongings bag from the locker. She handed me my smartphone with a gentle, pitying smile before stepping out to give me privacy. My fingers trembled as I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated and a flood of notifications instantly cascaded down the glass. My breath hitched in my throat. I braced myself for the barrage of frantic text messages from my parents, the dozens of missed voicemails from Marcus explaining how sorry they were that the launch party kept them away, the desperate pleas for an update on my surgical recovery. I opened my messages. Nothing. Not a single text from my mother. Not one missed call from my father. Marcus had not even bothered to send a generic get-well-soon emoji. But my phone was not silent. It was vibrating furiously with fraud alert warnings and banking notifications from my exclusive black card. The very same credit card my parents had manipulated me into linking to Marcus's business account for emergency startup expenses. I tapped the banking application, my eyes struggling to focus through the lingering haze of pain medication. What I saw on that screen instantly incinerated any remaining shred of family loyalty I held. While I was lying immobile, unable to feed or bathe myself, my family was executing a masterclass in financial gluttony. A charge for $12,000 at the most exclusive oceanfront resort in San Diego. A transaction for $8,000 at a luxury boutique, clearly Chloe upgrading her wardrobe for the launch party red carpet. Another alert showed $15,000 dropped at a VIP nightclub on premium champagne service. I scrolled further, my vision turning red. Marcus had swiped my card for a private yacht rental, charging another $20,000. They were not just ignoring my existence. They were actively celebrating my brother's fabricated success using the very wealth I had bled to build. The sheer audacity of it stole the breath directly from my lungs. Chloe had stood in my hospital room and called my contribution a few pennies. Yet she was currently sleeping in a penthouse suite paid for by my venture capital firm. My mother had dismissed my broken spine as a minor inconvenience, choosing instead to sip vintage champagne on my dime. They had left me to rot in an intensive care unit while treating my bank account like an endless fountain of cash. The crushing sorrow that had weighed heavily on my chest for 7 days evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. The tears that had threatened to spill were burned away by an infernal anger. I did not want them to call me anymore. I did not want their fake apologies or their toxic brand of conditional love. I wanted to dismantle the fraudulent empire I had allowed them to build. As I stared at the ceiling, actively formulating the exact sequence of how I would freeze every single financial asset, they had access to the door to my room pushed open. It was the head nurse, a seasoned professional who usually only handled administrative duties. She was not carrying medical charts or medication. She walked in holding a hospital-issued tablet, her expression a complex mixture of professional concern and deep curiosity. She approached my bed, cautiously glancing back at the hallway before pulling the privacy curtain shut. "I have been debating whether I should show you this," she said, her voice dropping to a hushed, confidential tone. "But given the fact that your listed emergency contacts have not answered a single call from our surgical team all week, I felt you had the right to know. You have not been completely abandoned." I furrowed my brow, a sharp stab of pain reminding me not to move my neck. "What are you talking about?" She stepped closer and tilted the tablet toward my line of sight. "It is from the security camera stationed directly outside the intensive care unit doors." She tapped the screen to play a video file. I watched the black and white footage illuminate. The timestamp showed 2 o'clock in the morning from 3 days ago. A woman stepped into the frame. Even through the grainy security footage, her presence commanded absolute authority. She was a tall, elegant black woman dressed in a flawlessly tailored trench coat, moving with a quiet, undeniable power. She walked up to the heavy glass doors of the intensive care unit and stopped. She did not try to enter. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed intently on my room. The nurse fast-forwarded the video to the next night. The same woman appeared again. "She comes every single night after visiting hours end," the head nurse whispered, tapping the screen to switch to another night's footage. "She never causes a disturbance. She just watches you for about an hour, speaks briefly with the night shift staff to ask highly specific medical questions about your spinal recovery, leaves a gift at the nurse's station, and disappears before sunrise. We assumed she was an executive from your company." The nurse handed me a small, beautifully wrapped velvet box that had been sitting in her pocket. I had to know who was checking on me with such persistent devotion. I asked the nurse to pause the footage and zoom in on the latest video clip where the woman had turned slightly toward the camera lens to hand the night nurse a package. The image enlarged, the pixels shifting until the woman's face came into sharp, unmistakable focus. The elegant high cheekbones, the piercing, intelligent eyes, the distinct regal jawline that shared an uncanny resemblance to my own father. My heart monitor immediately betrayed my shock, the machine emitting a rapid, frantic tempo that echoed wildly throughout the sterile room. I knew exactly who this woman was. And her sudden appearance in my life, after 2 decades of absolute banishment, meant that the impending war with my family was about to become catastrophic. It was Aunt Vivienne, the woman my father had violently erased from our family history 2 decades ago. Growing up, her name was a forbidden word in our household. My mother, Patricia, used her as the ultimate cautionary tale, whispering to her country club friends about Lawrence's disgraced older sister who went crazy and shamed the family name. They painted her as a bitter, unstable rebel who walked away from her bloodline. Yet, the woman on that security footage did not look like a disgraced outcast. She looked like absolute power. I handed the tablet back to the nurse, my chest heaving against the rigid confines of my halo brace. I needed to find her. I needed to know why the family pariah was the only person standing vigil outside my intensive care unit. But before I could even force the words past my dry lips, the heavy wooden door of my room swung open. The air in the sterile room shifted instantly. Aunt Vivienne stepped over the threshold, and the reality of her presence was staggering. She did not tiptoe in with the hesitant, pitying steps of a grieving relative. She commanded the space. She wore a tailored, immaculate ivory suit that radiated quiet, generational wealth. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon, highlighting those sharp cheekbones and the piercing gaze that mirrored my own. There were no tears in her eyes. There was no trembling in her hands. She simply looked at the nurse and gave a single dismissive nod. The nurse, completely intimidated by Vivienne's aura, immediately backed out of the room and let the door click shut. We were entirely alone. "You have Lawrence's eyes, but thankfully, you do not seem to share his spineless nature," she said. Her voice was rich, resonant, and completely devoid of the sympathetic coddling I had come to loathe. I stared at her, fighting the physical agony radiating down my neck just to maintain eye contact. "Aunt Vivienne," I managed to gasp out, my voice cracking under the strain. She pulled a plastic visitor chair to the side of my bed, sitting down and crossing one impeccably clothed leg over the other. "Save your breath, Maya. I already know everything. I know your spine is fractured in 2 places. I know your golden boy brother is currently popping bottles of vintage champagne on your black card. And I know Patricia and Lawrence looked at your broken body and decided a cocktail party in San Diego was more important than your survival." A hot, suffocating wave of shame washed over me. I pride myself on being a ruthless venture capitalist, a woman who dismantles bad deals before breakfast. Yet here I was, bankrolling my own humiliation. "I made a bad investment," I muttered, trying desperately to salvage some shred of my professional dignity. "I thought I was helping Marcus build his company." Vivienne let out a sharp, humorless laugh that cut straight to my core. "An investment implies a legal return, Maya. You did not invest a dime. You paid a ransom for their conditional love." I flinched as if she had physically struck me. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the edge of my bed, her gaze stripping away every defense I had left. "Do not feel stupid," she continued, her tone softening just a fraction but remaining sharp as a scalpel. "It is the exact same playbook they used on me 20 years ago. You really think your father built his first real estate firm through sheer hard work and determination? Lawrence did not pull himself up by his bootstraps. He bled me dry." My eyes widened. My entire life, my father's origin story had been a sacred family myth of black excellence and self-made triumph. "I took my inheritance, my credit score, and my business strategies," Vivienne said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I was the one who secured his first commercial property. But the moment I demanded my rightful equity, the moment I asked to be treated as an equal partner rather than a silent benefactor, your mother went to work." Patricia orchestrated a masterclass in character assassination. She went to our church, to our community leaders, to our entire social circle, and painted me as an unstable, greedy woman trying to destroy her own brother. They exiled me to protect his fragile ego and their pristine image. The truth hit me harder than the impact of the car crash. The generational sickness was staring me right in the face. Our family had a designated role for its women. We were the stepping stones, the silent sacrifices, the sacrificial lambs slaughtered on the altar of male mediocrity. They groomed me my entire life to be Marcus's safety net, conditioning me to believe that my financial success was only valuable if it elevated my brother. And the moment Chloe stepped into the picture with her white privilege and her wealthy father Patricia and Lawrence eagerly pushed me aside to worship at her altar. "You survived them," I whispered, looking at Vivian's pristine suit and the flawless diamond resting on her finger. "You did more than survive." "I became a ghost to them," she replied coolly. "But a very, very wealthy ghost. I built a venture capital firm that swallows companies like theirs for breakfast. I have watched you from afar, Maya. I watched you fight your way into the finance world. I watched you build your wealth. And I watched you make the exact same mistake I made by handing the keys to your kingdom to a brother who despises your brilliance. Why are you here now?" I asked the monitors beside me, beeping at a faster rhythm as the adrenaline surged through my veins. Vivian stood up, her towering presence casting a long shadow over my hospital bed. She reached into her oversized designer leather tote bag. "I did not come here to hold your hand and wipe your tears, Maya. You do not need pity, you need ammunition." She pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder sealed with a thick red string. "You think they drove down to San Diego just to celebrate a simple application launch. You think Marcus is just throwing a party to show off the software you funded?" She asked, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous, predatory light. She tossed the heavy folder directly onto my chest. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my ribs, but I did not care. "Open it," Vivian commanded. "Because the betrayal you think you are facing right now is absolutely nothing compared to what they are actually doing to you." My hands trembled as I reached for the thick red string winding around the manila envelope. My halo brace made moving a chore, but Vivian's icy intensity compelled me to ignore the pain. I pulled out a stack of legal documents. The first page leaped out at me. It was a binding letter of intent for a corporate acquisition. I scanned the first paragraph. The buyer was Vanguard Tech Innovations, the conglomerate owned by Chloe's wealthy white father. The seller was Marcus, listed as the sole founder of the application I personally bankrolled. The purchase price stared back at me in bold, unforgiving print. Exactly $50 million. $50 million. I choked out the number, burning my throat. They told me this was a networking event. Vivian let out a bitter scoff. "A launch party is an excuse to drink expensive champagne, Maya. Marcus is executing a secretive buyout. Chloe engineered the deal through her father's board. They are selling the company you built to her family's empire and cashing a $50 million check while you lie here on morphine." I shook my head, my mind racing. They cannot sell it. Marcus might be the charismatic founder, but the software's core architecture is legally mine. I retained ownership of the intellectual property during seed funding. The source code is locked in an LLC under my name. Vanguard cannot acquire an asset Marcus does not own. Chloe's father is a ruthless businessman. He would never authorize an acquisition without rigorous due diligence on the intellectual property. Vivian leaned closer. "Turn to the last page, Maya. Look what your parents brought while you were fighting for your life." My fingers felt numb as I flipped through the heavy stack. Near the bottom lay a single sheet of paper. It was an intellectual property transfer agreement that caused the room to spin. The document surrendered my LLC's ownership of the source code, transferring all rights directly to Marcus. I stared at the bottom. There on the signature line was my name. The loops mimicked my handwriting, but the pressure was wrong. It was a jagged imitation. Beside my forged signature were two familiar witness signatures. Patricia and Lawrence, my own parents. My parents had witnessed the transfer. I looked at the date stamped on the notary seal. It was dated 3 days ago. 3 days ago, I was unconscious on a ventilator after my car was crushed. They forged my signature. I whispered, the reality of their crime wrapping around my throat. They brought a notary into the intensive care unit while I was in a coma. Vivian nodded slowly. "Your mother paid off a shady notary from her country club to backdate the stamp. Patricia and Lawrence stood over your unconscious body, watched the machines breathe for you, and decided it was the perfect opportunity to steal your work. They forged your signature, witnessed the crime, and handed Marcus a $50 million fortune." The monitor beside my bed began to scream, my heart rate accelerating to a dangerous, frantic pace. My own parents. The people who had demanded my absolute loyalty, who had scolded me for being unsupportive, had orchestrated a massive financial fraud while I was fighting to survive. They did not just abandon me for a party. They abandoned me because seeing me awake and alert would ruin their lucrative heist. They needed me incapacitated. They probably hoped I would stay unconscious just long enough for the ink to dry on the Vanguard Tech acquisition. Chloe's taunting words from the first day echoed mercilessly in my mind. She had looked at me and called my investment a few pennies. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was actively gaslighting me, trying to make me feel small and insignificant, so I would not look too closely at the business structure. She and Marcus were planning to walk away with $50 million, leaving me with a shattered spine and a completely empty bank account. They wanted to take everything I had sacrificed my youth to build and hand it over to a wealthy family who already had everything. The sheer magnitude of their betrayal should have broken me entirely. It should have sent me spiraling into a deep, inescapable depression. But looking at the forged document tracing the fraudulent curves of my stolen name, I did not feel like crying. I felt a terrifying, absolute clarity. The generational curse Vivian had warned me about was staring me right in the face, and I was going to burn it to the ground. I looked up at Vivian. She was watching me intently, waiting to see if I would crumble or if I would finally fight back. "How long do we have until the ink on the Vanguard deal becomes permanent?" I asked, my voice suddenly devoid of any tremor or hesitation. Vivian smiled, a predatory, brilliant curve of her lips. "The final contracts are scheduled to be signed at a private gala tomorrow evening. They think they have won, Maya. They think you are permanently neutralized." I gripped the fraudulent transfer agreement, crumpling the edge of the paper in my fist. "I need to get out of this hospital bed immediately. I need a secure internet connection, and I need you to arrange transport to my house, because Marcus and Chloe are about to learn a very hard lesson about intellectual property." Vivian stood up, smoothing the front of her immaculate blazer. "I already have a private medical transport team waiting in the restricted parking lot. But Maya, you should know something before you go home." I braced myself against the pain radiating through my spine. "What else is there for me to know?" Vivian walked to the door, placing her hand on the handle. "Marcus did not just steal your code. He gave Chloe the security codes to your personal residence. And right now, she is not in San Diego. She is standing right in your living room." I ripped the intravenous line out of the back of my hand before the nurse could even protest. A sharp sting radiated up my arm, but it was entirely eclipsed by the absolute fire raging in my chest. "Get me my clothes," I commanded the startled medical staff rushing into the room. "I am discharging myself right now." The attending physician tried to block my path, warning me that leaving with a fractured spine and a freshly fitted halo brace could cause permanent nerve damage. I looked him dead in the eye and told him that if I stayed in this bed one more hour, the only permanent damage would be to the people who put me here. Vivian simply handed the doctor a stack of liability waivers she had already prepared and signaled her private security team to bring in the heavy metal walker. Every single step was a masterclass in agony. Gripping the cold aluminum handles of the walker, I forced my legs to move my spine, screaming in protest with each agonizing shuffle. I refused the wheelchair. I refused to let the hospital staff see me roll out like a victim. Vivian walked silently beside me, her presence a protective shield against the hovering nurses. We descended into the restricted underground parking garage where her armored luxury SUV was idling. The drive to my lakefront estate took 40 minutes, giving me ample time to process the sheer audacity of my family's betrayal. I had purchased this property 2 years ago. It was a sprawling, modern architectural masterpiece, situated in one of the most exclusive, historically gate-kept neighborhoods in the city. I was the youngest Black woman on the block to own a home outright. I had fought tooth and nail for that sanctuary. I had negotiated the closing, designed the interior, and paid the exorbitant property taxes with money I bled for. Now my brother had casually handed the security codes to his entitled wife, as if my home was a complimentary bonus to the $50 million company they had just stolen from me. As Vivian's driver turned onto my private tree-lined driveway, my grip on the leather seat tightened. The front gates, which should have been locked, were propped wide open. A massive commercial moving truck was backed right up to my custom mahogany front doors. I pushed the car door open before the driver could even put the vehicle in park. Vivian stepped out, offering a steady hand to help me maneuver the metal walker onto the paved driveway. The afternoon sun beat down on my face, but the air felt freezing. I shuffled painfully toward the entrance. My eyes darted to the keypad mounted next to the door. I reached out a trembling finger and punched in my 6-digit security code. The machine emitted a harsh, flat buzz. The LED light flashed red. Access denied. I punched the numbers again, pressing harder. Red light. Invalid entry. They had completely wiped my administrative access. My own brother had logged into the smart home system I paid for and locked me out of the house I owned. Before I could command Vivian's security team to break the glass, the heavy mahogany doors swung open from the inside. 2 burly men in matching gray uniforms walked out. They were not carrying trash or old boxes. They were carrying my custom velvet sofa. Following closely behind them was another worker balancing a large canvas. I recognized it instantly. It was an original painting by a prominent African-American artist that I had purchased to celebrate closing my first major venture capital fund. The worker carelessly bumped the gilded frame against the door jamb, chipping the expensive wood. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking from the strain, but echoing sharply across the manicured lawn. "Put that down immediately. You are trespassing on private property." The movers paused, looking confused, as they stared at a woman strapped into a medical halo brace and gripping a metal walker. One of them wiped sweat from his forehead. "We have a work order, lady. The homeowner told us to clear out the master suite and the home office to make room for the new renovations." "I am the homeowner," I snarled, forcing myself to take another agonizing step forward. "Drop my belongings right now, or my attorney will have you arrested for grand larceny before you can even load that truck." The workers exchanged a nervous glance, clearly unsure of how to proceed. They gently lowered my velvet sofa onto the driveway, suddenly very aware of the 2 massive private security guards flanking Vivian just a few feet behind me. "What is the holdup out here? I am paying you by the hour, not by the minute." The high-pitched, grating voice floated out from the foyer. The sound of expensive designer heels clicked rhythmically against my imported hardwood floors. The movers stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea to reveal the source of the command. Chloe stepped out onto my front porch. She was wearing a silk slip dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled looking, entirely too comfortable in a home she had absolutely no right to enter. In her right hand, she loosely held a crystal wine glass filled to the brim with my most expensive Pinot Noir, the bottles I specifically kept locked in the climate-controlled cellar. She stopped at the edge of the porch, looking down at me. For a split second, a flash of genuine panic widened her eyes. She clearly had not expected me to be awake, let alone discharged from the intensive care unit and standing on the front lawn. But Chloe had spent her entire life weaponizing her privilege, and she quickly recovered her composure. The shock melted into a practiced, sickeningly sweet smile of utter condescension. "Oh, Maya," Chloe sighed, taking a casual sip of my wine. "What are you doing out of bed? Marcus and I were just making sure your things were carefully packed away. You really should not be straining yourself like this. It is just a house. You can find a nice little apartment closer to downtown once you recover. We are going to need the space here for the new corporate headquarters." I gripped the cold aluminum of my walker so tightly my knuckles turned gray. The sheer audacity of her standing on my porch drinking my wine and casually evicting me from the property I purchased with my own capital was breathtaking. I did not scream. I did not cry. The seething rage inside me had crystallized into something far more dangerous than simple anger. It was absolute freezing clarity. "You are going to need the space for the new corporate headquarters." I repeated, my voice dangerously soft, yet carrying perfectly across the paved driveway. My spine throbbed with every syllable, but I refused to break eye contact. Chloe took another slow, deliberate sip of the Pinot Noir, leaving a smudge of red lipstick on the rim of the crystal glass. She sighed, shifting her weight effortlessly in her silk slip dress, projecting an aura of supreme, unbothered entitlement. "Oh, Maya, please do not make this difficult. Patricia and Lawrence completely agreed with us. Your mother said you would be perfectly fine downsizing. She told us how empty this massive house must feel for a single woman like you. It is really too much maintenance for someone in your condition anyway. Marcus needs a prestigious address to host the Vanguard Tech executives now that the merger is finalizing. You understand how the business world works, do you not? A small chic apartment downtown suits your lifestyle much better. I stared at her, absorbing the toxic layered microaggressions she delivered with a pageant queen's smile. She was speaking to me as if I were a charity case, a confused subordinate who needed her wealthy white sister-in-law to explain the complexities of corporate real estate. She was standing on the porch of a multi-million-dollar lakefront estate that I had negotiated, financed, and secured through my own venture capital firm, and she dared to lecture me about how the business world worked. "You have no legal right to be on this property, Chloe," I said, my tone flat and uncompromising. "Put the glass down, call your movers off my lawn, and vacate my house before I have my security team physically remove you for trespassing." Chloe rolled her eyes, her sweet facade dropping to reveal the spoiled, arrogant core underneath. She walked over to the patio table and picked up a silver iPad. "You are always so aggressive, Maya. This is exactly why your parents find you so exhausting to deal with. You never know how to just be a team player. Let me call your brother so he can explain it to you, since you are being so incredibly stubborn." She tapped her long, manicured nails against the glass screen. A moment later, the sharp, cheerful chime of a video call pierced the tense air. Marcus answered almost immediately. The screen illuminated to show my brother standing on a balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, holding a glass of amber liquid, his face flushed with the arrogant glow of unearned success. The background noise of the San Diego launch party echoed through the iPad speakers, a chorus of wealthy investors and tech elites mingling on my dime. "Babe, what is wrong?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with faux concern as he looked at his wife. "I am right in the middle of a conversation with your father and the board of directors." "Marcus, your sister is here," Chloe said, turning the iPad screen toward me. She made sure to frame me perfectly, capturing the medical halo brace screwed into my skull, my hospital gown, and the metal walker keeping me upright. "She is causing a massive scene on the front lawn and threatening to call security on the movers. I was just trying to help her pack her things like Patricia suggested, but she is being completely unreasonable." Marcus let out a loud, theatrical groan, his expression twisting into a scowl of profound annoyance. He leaned closer to the camera, looking directly at my broken body with absolute contempt. "Maya, what the hell are you doing out of the hospital?" Marcus barked, his voice echoing loudly through the courtyard. "Are you out of your mind? Do not give my wife a hard time while she is doing you a favor. I am trying to run a business here, and I do not have time for your dramatic attention-seeking stunts." I stared at the screen, observing the brother I had bankrolled for the last 3 years. "You stole my intellectual property, Marcus. You and our parents forged my signature on a transfer agreement while I was lying in a coma on a ventilator. And now you are trying to steal my home." Marcus scoffed, taking a casual sip of his drink. "Stop acting like a victim, Maya. You owe this family. Your education was ridiculously expensive, and Mom and Dad sacrificed everything so you could go play finance in the city. You throwing some startup cash at my application was the least you could do to repay them. I let you contribute to my company as an honor. It was a privilege for you to be part of my vision. But this is my company now, and I am the one closing a $50 million deal with Vanguard Tech. Now stop harassing my wife, get back to the hospital, and let the movers do their job. I am entertaining VIPs tonight, and I will not let your jealousy ruin my success." I was entirely convinced of his own delusion. My parents had spent 34 years inflating his ego, convincing him that the world owed him greatness simply because he was their precious son. They had convinced him that my assets, my money, and my brilliant coding architecture were rightfully his to take. He genuinely believed that stripping me of my wealth and my home was a justified tax for my existence. I did not scream at the screen. I did not waste my breath explaining the legal ramifications of forgery or the exact mechanics of corporate theft. Words were completely useless against this level of generational narcissism. Instead, the corners of my mouth curled upward into a cold, terrifying smile. "An honor," I repeated softly, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "A privilege to be part of your vision." I reached into the pocket of my hospital gown and pulled out my smartphone. I bypassed the standard applications and opened a highly encrypted terminal linked directly to the private decentralized servers I personally maintained. The servers that held the absolute unmodified master source code for the entire application Marcus was currently selling to Vanguard Tech. He thought he owned the company because he had a forged piece of paper. He did not realize that I possessed the master override keys embedded deep within the architecture itself. Marcus rolled his eyes on the iPad screen. Yes, an honor. Now put your phone away and get off my property before I have to fly back there and handle you myself. Enjoy your VIP guests, Marcus, I whispered. My thumb hovered over the screen. I did not hesitate. I did not blink. I pressed exactly one command button, executing a catastrophic system-wide shutdown sequence that no one on Earth could reverse but me. The silent command engaged instantly. A lethal digital assassin released into the network. It took exactly 4 seconds for the latency to catch up to the West Coast. I watched the iPad screen in Chloe's hands with unblinking focus. Behind Marcus, the massive presentation screens showcasing the application's live user data and predictive algorithms abruptly froze. The sleek animated graphics fractured into jagged pixels before turning violently black. Then a stark, glaring red error message materialized across every single monitor in the San Diego ballroom. Critical system failure. Master override initiated. Marcus did not notice immediately. He was still glaring at the iPad camera, puffing his chest, waiting for me to bow to his authority and apologize. But the atmosphere behind him shifted instantly. The gentle clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of self-important tech investors ceased. A heavy, suffocating silence swept over the ballroom, followed rapidly by an uprising of panicked voices. A man in a tailored suit, presumably one of Chloe's father's Vanguard executives, stepped into the frame, tapping Marcus forcefully on the shoulder and pointing at the dead monitors. Marcus turned around, his smug, arrogant face drained of all color. The ruddy flush of champagne and unearned victory vanished, leaving behind an ashen mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He pulled his own smartphone from his tuxedo pocket, his fingers frantically swiping and jabbing at the screen. Nothing happened. I had completely severed the application from its host environment. He was holding an empty digital shell, and the entire room of billionaires was watching his empire evaporate. "What did you do?" Marcus hissed into the camera, his eyes darting back to the iPad screen. "Maya, what did you just do? Turn it back on right now." I leaned heavily on my aluminum walker, feeling the cold metal dig into my palms. I fought through the searing pain in my fractured vertebrae to stand as tall as the halo brace would allow. I did nothing but reclaim my property. I replied, my voice steady, carrying no trace of the sister they had spent 32 years manipulating into submission. "You forged a piece of paper, Marcus. But you forgot that a piece of paper does not write code. It does not maintain server architecture. And it certainly does not grant you the actual genius required to keep this company breathing." On my end, Chloe was staring at the iPad screen in absolute horror. The realization of what was unfolding struck her with the force of a freight train. Her delicate, perfectly manicured fingers went limp. The crystal wine glass slipped from her grasp. It hit the imported hardwood floor of my foyer, shattering into 100 glittering shards. The expensive Pinot Noir splashed across her bare legs and stained the floorboards like fresh blood. "Fix it!" Chloe shrieked, her composed upper-crust facade dissolving into an ugly, desperate panic. "Maya, turn the servers back on right this second. My father is in that room. You are embarrassing us in front of the Vanguard board." "You embarrassed yourselves," Aunt Vivian interjected, her rich voice cutting through the humid afternoon air. She stepped forward, her towering presence forcing Chloe to physically take a step back into the foyer. "You played a dangerous game of theft, little girl, and you severely underestimated the women in this family." Through the iPad speakers, the chaos in San Diego was escalating into a full-blown crisis. I could hear my father Lawrence attempting to do damage control loudly, assuring investors that it was just a minor technical glitch. My mother Patricia was shrilly demanding that the hotel staff check the internet connection. They were scrambling desperately, trying to tape together a house of cards that I had just effortlessly incinerated. "Maya, turn it on," Marcus screamed, completely abandoning his professional demeanor. His voice cracked high and hysterical, echoing terribly over the speaker. They are pulling the contracts. Vanguard is pausing the acquisition. Do you understand what you are doing? You are costing us $50 million. I leaned closer to the iPad screen, ensuring he could see the absolute absence of mercy in my eyes. I am not costing you anything, Marcus, because it was never yours to sell. You told me it was an honor for me to contribute. You told me it was a privilege to be part of your vision. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second before delivering the final blow. Enjoy it, brother. Chloe lunged forward, her face twisted in a feral, unhinged rage, reaching out as if she were going to physically grab the halo brace bolted into my skull. Before she could close the distance, Vivian's private security guards stepped in front of me, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark suits. One of the guards simply raised a hand, forcing Chloe to stumble backward over the shattered crystal and spilled wine. "Get her out of my house!" Chloe shrieked, her voice bouncing off the vaulted ceilings she had tried to steal. She pointed a trembling finger at the movers who were still standing frozen on the driveway. "Call the police. Have them arrested for trespassing." Vivian let out a low, melodic laugh that chilled the air. "Call them," she challenged, looking down at Chloe with absolute disdain. "Please call the authorities right now. I have a team of corporate litigators who would absolutely love to discuss the forged intellectual property transfer your husband executed while the legal owner was comatose in the intensive care unit. We can handle the eviction and the felony fraud charges all in one afternoon." Chloe clamped her mouth shut, her chest heaving, her eyes darting frantically between Vivian, the security guards, and my unyielding gaze. She knew they were trapped. White privilege and a forged signature were not going to save her from the digital guillotine I had just activated. "Let us go," Maya Vivian said smoothly, turning to assist me with the walker. "The air here is getting incredibly stale." I turned the metal frame around, ignoring the sharp spikes of pain radiating from my spine. Every step away from that front door felt like stepping out of a generational cage. The movers scrambled out of our way, their eyes wide as they watched me shuffle back toward the idling armored SUV. They had clearly realized they were standing in the middle of a massive legal war zone and wanted absolutely no part of it. As I reached the open door of the vehicle, the audio from the iPad flared up one last time. Marcus had grabbed the device from his end, his face taking up the entire screen. He was no longer the smug tech founder. He looked frantic, deranged, the veins bulging in his neck as his $50 million payday dissolved into thin air. "You are dead!" Maya Marcus roared through the speakers, his voice raw and violent. "Do you hear me? You think you can do this to our family?" Mom and Dad are furious. Vanguard just walked out of the room. "We are chartering a jet right now. We are flying back tonight, and we are going to teach you a lesson you will never forget. You are going to sign those servers over to me if I have to break your hands to do it." I ended the call, cutting off Marcus mid-threat, and let the iPad drop onto the passenger seat of Vivian's SUV. The ride to the hotel was a blur of exhausting pain and surging adrenaline. Vivian had arranged for me to stay in this penthouse suite of a highly secure, ultra-luxury hotel downtown, a place where the staff was trained to prioritize absolute discretion. By the time her private medical team helped me navigate the elevators and settled me into the massive king bed, my body was vibrating with the physical toll of the day. The halo brace restricted my every movement, forcing me to stare straight up at the vaulted ceiling. Vivian left a security detail at the lobby level and promised to return at dawn with her legal team. The suite was completely silent, the kind of heavy, insulated silence that only obscene wealth can buy. I should have been able to sleep finally safe from the immediate chaos, but my mind was calculating the next move. The digital clock on the nightstand clicked to exactly midnight when the heavy oak door of my suite suddenly clicked open. The electronic chime of the lock disengaging sent a violent spike of panic through my chest. Security should have stopped anyone at the elevator bank. But as the door flew open and hit the wall with a deafening thud, I realized my fatal oversight. When I booked this hotel profile years ago, I had added my mother as an authorized secondary guest for emergencies, a convenience that allowed her to bypass the front desk and use her own identification to secure a keycard. Patricia and Lawrence stormed into the penthouse, bringing the frantic, unhinged energy of the San Diego fiasco directly to the foot of my bed. They were still wearing their wrinkled formal wear from the ruined launch party, their faces flushed with the kind of primal rage I had not seen since I was a teenager. Neither of them spared a single glance at the metal screws drilled into my skull. They did not look at the heavy brace keeping my spine from snapping completely. All they saw was the obstacle standing between them and a $50 million payout. "Are you out of your mind?" my father bellowed, his voice echoing off the marble walls of the suite. He marched right up to the edge of the mattress, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what you have just done? You humiliated Marcus in front of the Vanguard board. You humiliated us. They pulled the entire contract, Maya. The investors walked out of the ballroom. You just destroyed your brother's life over a petty, jealous temper tantrum." My mother stepped forward, stepping into my limited line of sight. Her eyes were wild, her signature perfectly coiffed hair falling in messy strands around her face. "Turn the servers back on right now," Patricia commanded, pointing a trembling manicured finger at my face. "You are acting like a complete lunatic. We told everyone that you were suffering from complications from the crash, that the medication was making you paranoid and vindictive. We have a team of corporate lawyers waiting in a conference room downstairs trying to salvage the merger. All you have to do is unlock the administrative access and transfer the intellectual property over to Marcus like you were supposed to." I stared up at the two people who brought me into this world, feeling nothing but a profound, hollow disgust. Like I was supposed to, I repeated, my voice raspy but entirely steady. "You mean like you forged my signature to do? You committed a felony while I was in a coma, Mom. You tried to steal my company." "It is not your company," my father roared, slamming his open palm down on the glass side table. The sudden noise made me flinch, sending a shooting pain down my back. "Marcus is the face of that brand. He did the networking. He pitched the vision. You just wrote the code and provided the seed money. We are a family, and you are acting like a greedy, selfish traitor. You are deliberately destroying generational wealth because you cannot handle the fact that your brother is more successful than you." I forced myself to breathe through the physical agony, refusing to let them see me wince. Generational wealth for who, Dad? For Marcus. For Chloe's White Trust Fund family. Because you certainly were not planning on cutting me in on the sale of my own asset. My father leaned over the bed, his face inches from mine, his eyes dark with a toxic, controlling fury that I remembered all too well from my childhood. "You listen to me very carefully," he sneered, playing the ultimate card they always kept hidden in their sleeves for whenever I dared to step out of line. "You owe this family your entire life. Do you hear me? You owe us. When you were 18 years old, spiraling out of control, throwing your future away on pills and depression, who do you think saved you? I paid your rehab bills. I kept the police from putting your name in the paper. I spent tens of thousands of dollars to clean you up and put you back on track. We covered up your shameful little addiction to protect your future. You were a broken, pathetic junkie, and we gave you a second chance. You owe this family everything you have." The air in the room grew instantly heavy. For over a decade, they had used my lowest moment, a dark period of mental health struggles and addiction that stemmed directly from their suffocating pressure, as a weapon to keep me compliant. Every time I achieved something, every time I built wealth or demanded respect, they would dangle my 18-year-old self over my head. They expected me to break. They expected the shame of my past to silence me, to force me into submission, to make me hand over the keys to the kingdom out of pure, unadulterated guilt. But I was no longer that scared, broken 18-year-old girl begging for their conditional love. I did not cry. I did not apologize. I did not shrink away from my father's glaring eyes. Slowly, painfully, I reached my hand toward the nightstand where Vivian had left a heavy, meticulously organized folder. I grabbed the thick stack of printed bank statements and tax records. With a flick of my wrist, I threw the entire stack directly onto the glass table in front of them. The heavy thud of the documents hitting the glass table echoed through the penthouse suite like a gunshot. My parents stared at the sprawling mess of bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and highlighted financial logs cascading over the edges. My father blinked, his arrogant sneer faltering for a fraction of a second as he looked down at the undeniable paper trail of his own financial parasitism. "What is this garbage?" Lawrence demanded, refusing to actually touch the papers. "You think throwing a few bank statements around changes what you owe us? I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, my voice echoing off the marble walls with a cold, piercing resonance. "You love bringing up that rehab bill, Dad. You love dangling my lowest moment over my head like a guillotine. Let us do the math right now. You paid exactly $22,000 for that facility when I was 18. A facility I only needed because the crushing pressure of being your perfect marketable daughter drove me to the edge of a total psychological collapse. But let us just look at the numbers. Turn to the second page of that stack. My mother." Patricia hesitated before her manicured fingers reached out to flip the page. Her eyes darted across the highlighted rows of spreadsheet data. 2 years after I got out of that facility, I landed my first job as a junior financial analyst. I continued not breaking eye contact with my father. My very first year-end bonus was $35,000. I wired the entire amount directly into your checking account. The next year, when I made senior analyst, I wired you $50,000. I paid back my so-called life debt before I even turned 22. Everything after that was just pure, unadulterated extortion. "That is a lie!" Patricia shrieked, clutching her designer purse to her chest. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head." "I put the roof over your head, Mom!" I fired back, my voice rising to dominate the room. "Look at the rest of the statements. Look at the recurring charges. The lease on that silver Mercedes you drove to the airport to abandon me, paid by my black card. The exorbitant monthly dues for that exclusive country club where you sit around drinking mimosas and bragging to your friends about your wealthy family, funded entirely by my venture capital firm. The designer suits, the lavish vacations, the very clothes on your backs right now. I bought all of it. You spent decades telling the entire community that you were the epitome of Black excellence and self-made success, while secretly draining my bank accounts to maintain your fraudulent upper-class facade." Lawrence's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "How dare you speak to us this way? We managed those funds for the family. We kept Marcus afloat while he was developing his genius ideas. Marcus is a leech, and you two are his enablers." I spat back, ignoring the burning pain radiating up my fractured spine. "But the bank is officially closed. As of 9 o'clock tonight, every single secondary credit card bearing your names has been permanently deactivated. The automatic transfers covering your mortgage have been blocked. Your car leases, your club memberships, your vanity charity donations, all canceled. I have completely severed your financial supply line. You have absolutely nothing left that belongs to me." The silence that followed was absolute. The realization crashed over them like a tidal wave. They had stormed into my hotel room, expecting to bully a broken girl into handing over a $50 million tech company. Instead, they found themselves staring at complete financial ruin. Without my money, they could not maintain the wealthy lifestyle they had constructed their entire identities around. They would be exposed to their social circles as complete frauds. My father took a step back, his chest heaving as he struggled to process the total loss of control. He looked like a deflated balloon, the realization of his impending poverty stripping away his imposing presence. But my mother did not retreat. Patricia was a woman who survived on manipulation, and when cornered, she always went straight for the jugular. Her initial shock morphed into a vicious, unhinged venom. She stepped around the glass table, her eyes narrowing into malicious slits. "You think you are so smart, Maya," she hissed, her voice trembling with raw malice. "You think you can just cut us off and walk away with your little millions? You think you can humiliate us and face no consequences? You brought this on yourselves," I replied coldly. "Oh, you have no idea what I can bring on you," Patricia snarled, stepping closer to the bed. "You want to play hardball. Fine. Let us play. You think Vanguard Tech or any of your elite venture capital partners will trust a single dollar to a woman with your medical history? You think those rich conservative investors want to do business with an unstable, drug-addicted psychiatric patient?" I kept my expression completely neutral, though my heart pounded against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" "I kept everything, Maya. she bragged, a sickening smile twisting her features. I kept every single medical file, every psychiatric evaluation, every detailed report from your time in that facility. I have the detailed notes about your depressive episodes and your chemical dependencies. If you do not turn those servers back on and restore our financial access immediately, I will leak your entire medical history to the press. I will send your psychiatric files to every single board member at Vanguard Tech. I will email them to your business partners. I will show the entire financial district that the brilliant Maya is actually just a crazy, unstable junkie. We will completely destroy your career, and you will be left with absolutely nothing. She stood there practically vibrating with triumphant malice, waiting for me to shatter. She expected me to burst into tears, to beg for mercy, to panic at the thought of my hard-earned professional reputation being annihilated by a scandal. She thought she had found the ultimate leverage to force me back into submission. I did not panic. I did not shed a single tear. I simply let out a long, slow breath and reached my right hand toward the marble nightstand beside my bed. I picked up my sleek silver laptop. I opened the lid, letting the bright glow of the screen illuminate my face in the dim suite. I typed in my password with steady, deliberate keystrokes. I opened a specific, heavily encrypted file folder that Aunt Vivian's private investigators had delivered to me just hours ago. I did not say a word. I simply turned the laptop around, rotating the bright screen so it directly faced my mother. The bright glow of the monitor cast sharp shadows across my mother's face. Patricia squinted at the high-resolution display. Her lips parted in a cruel, confident sneer that rapidly dissolved into absolute paralyzing horror. On the screen was not a psychiatric evaluation or a record of my past mistakes. It was a meticulously organized digital dossier of her own criminal enterprise. Right in the center of the screen was a detailed spreadsheet cross-referencing 7 years of federal tax returns against the banking records of the Anderson Family Hope Foundation. The foundation was a charity my parents had established ostensibly to provide scholarships for underprivileged Black youth in our community. They threw lavish fundraising galas, solicited donations from wealthy friends, and posed for photographs holding oversized novelty checks. It was the crown jewel of their philanthropic image. But the documents on my screen painted the true, sickening picture. There were no scholarships. There were no community grants. My mother stared at the undeniable proof that she and my father had been funneling millions of dollars in tax-free donations directly into offshore accounts and shell companies to finance their extravagant lifestyle. I had the fraudulent wire transfers, the fake invoice receipts, and the forged board member signatures. It was 7 years of systemic, irrefutable federal tax evasion and wire fraud. Send my medical records to Vanguard Tech. I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet slicing through the silence of the penthouse suite like a scalpel. Email every single venture capitalist in my contacts. Go ahead and try to destroy my reputation. But before you hit send, I want you to ask yourself a very important question. Do you really want to see what the Internal Revenue Service will do with a 7-year paper trail of felony tax fraud and corporate embezzlement? Patricia took a physical step backward, bumping heavily into my father. Her designer handbag slipped from her grasp, hitting the marble floor with a dull thud. Her hands were shaking so violently she had to cross her arms tightly over her chest to hide the tremors. "Where did you get that information?" my father demanded, stepping forward to look at the screen. The remaining color drained completely from his face as he recognized his own signature on the fraudulent foundation tax filings. "This is entirely fabricated. You hacked our personal bank accounts." "I did not have to hack anything, Dad," I replied, maintaining my steady, unyielding gaze. "You used my corporate attorneys to set up the initial corporate structure for the charity because you wanted to save money on legal fees. You were just too arrogant and too sloppy to realize that left a permanent digital footprint. Aunt Vivian's private investigators simply followed the money, and the money led straight to a federal prison sentence for both of you." The mention of Vivian's name was the final nail in their coffin. My parents had spent decades convincing themselves they had defeated her, that they had successfully banished the smartest woman in the family. Realizing that Vivian and I had joined forces to completely dismantle their empire left them entirely stripped of their power. "You are bluffing," Patricia hissed, though her voice lacked any of its previous venom. It was a high, thin sound of absolute desperation. You would never turn your own parents over to the federal government. It would destroy the family name. It would ruin you by association. I shifted slightly in my halo brace, ensuring I held her terrified stare. There is no family name left to destroy, Mom. You sold it for a $50 million buyout. And as for my reputation, I have spent the last decade building an airtight, independent corporate entity. My hands are completely clean. Can you say the same? If you utter a single word about my medical history, if you make one phone call to sabotage my business, I will press a button and send this entire dossier to the federal prosecutor's office before you can even make it back to your car. My father looked like a man who had just been handed a death sentence. The blustering, domineering patriarch who had marched into my hotel room demanding submission was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, aging, realizing he was entirely at the mercy of the daughter he had abused and discarded. Patricia, we need to leave right now, Lawrence muttered, grabbing. He was practically dragging her toward the heavy oak door. We are leaving. But my money! Patricia whimpered, her eyes darting between the deactivated black cards on the glass table and the glowing laptop screen. Maya, please, you cannot just leave us with nothing. We will lose the house. We will lose the cars. We will have absolutely nothing left. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature on a transfer agreement while I was in a coma, I said, my voice devoid of any sympathy. You have exactly zero leverage here. Get out of my room. They did not argue. They did not try to negotiate. The absolute certainty of federal prison time shattered whatever delusions of grandeur they still held. They turned and fled the penthouse suite, leaving behind their deactivated credit cards and their destroyed pride. The heavy door slammed shut behind them, sealing me in the quiet sanctuary of the hotel room. I was alone. The adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation slowly began to ebb, replaced by a profound, heavy exhaustion. My fractured spine ached with a dull, persistent throb, but the emotional weight that had suffocated me for 32 years was completely gone. I had faced the monsters of my childhood, looked them directly in the eye, and stripped them of their power. I lay back against the pillows, the glowing screen of my laptop, the only light in the room, and finally allowed myself to rest. When the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I woke up feeling an unfamiliar sensation. Freedom. The air in the room felt lighter. I pressed the button to call for my private medical attendant, ready to begin the grueling process of physical rehabilitation. I had my company, I had my wealth, and I had my dignity. The war was over. Or so I thought. My phone vibrated on the marble nightstand, shattering the peaceful morning silence. I reached for it, assuming it was a check-in text from Vivian or my legal team. Instead, the screen displayed a new message from Marcus. I opened the notification, my heart rate instantly accelerating as I read the words glaring back at me. You really think you won, Maya? Did you honestly believe a simple server lockout would stop us? Chloe's father called in Vanguard's elite cybersecurity team overnight. They bypassed your little encryption and restored the master data files. We have full access to the application again. The $50 million acquisition is back on track. The gala signing is still happening tonight, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop us from taking everything. See you at the finish line. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, reading Marcus's arrogant message a second time. Vanguard's elite cybersecurity team had bypassed my encryption. The $50 million acquisition was back on track. For a fraction of a second, a cold spike of anxiety threatened to pierce my newfound resolve. Then my rational, analytical brain kicked into gear. Vanguard's technicians were good, but they were dealing with an architecture I had built from scratch. If they thought they had restored the master data files, they had only breached the superficial decoy servers I had layered over the actual core framework. They had not unlocked the vault. They had simply picked the lock on an empty room. Marcus was walking into a trap of his own making, blinded by his desperate greed and Chloe's whispering ambition. Before I could type a response, I had no intention of sending. The heavy doors of my penthouse suite swung open. Aunt Vivian strode into the room, bringing the crackling energy of a looming thunderstorm. She was not alone. Behind her filed a precise, intimidating entourage, consisting of two corporate litigators in sharp charcoal suits, a forensic accountant holding a locked briefcase, and a team of high-end stylists carrying garment bags. The suite instantly transformed from a quiet recovery room into a strategic war room. Vivienne took one look at my phone, snatched it from my hand, and read Marcus's message. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her flawless face. She tossed the phone onto the bed and turned to look me directly in the eyes. "It is time to show them the true power of the women in our bloodline," Vivienne declared, her voice vibrating with absolute authority. "They think they can use our brilliance to fund their mediocre legacies and then lock us in the basement. Tonight, we do not just break the lock, we bring the entire house down on their heads." I pushed myself up against the pillows, ignoring the grinding ache in my fractured spine. "I am ready. Tell me the plan." The preparation was not merely about aesthetic transformation. It was a meticulously choreographed blueprint for a public slaughter. The lead corporate litigator, a sharp-eyed black woman named Denise, spread architectural blueprints of the gala venue across the glass coffee table alongside stacks of legal injunctions. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing the precise timing of the evening. We charted exactly when Chloe's father would take the stage to announce the merger, mapping out the security blind spots and the audio-visual control booth. Denise explained the legal mechanisms we had weaponized. We were not simply walking in to stop a transaction. We were walking in to serve Marcus with a federal injunction for intellectual property theft and wire fraud on a stage filled with his most valuable investors. While Denise finalized the legal strategy, Vivienne shared her own history, her words sharp and unyielding. "When your father tried to erase me from the family narrative 20 years ago, he did it at a private country club dinner," Vivienne said, watching the stylist lay out makeup brushes. "He stood up in front of the community leaders I had introduced him to and claimed my real estate investments were the result of his brilliant mentorship. I was young, shocked, and unprepared for the sheer audacity of his lie. I let him rewrite my history because I thought family loyalty meant protecting his ego. I walked away in silence. You will not make that mistake, Maya. You will not bleed quietly so your brother can wear a crown he did not earn." The truth of her words settled deep into my bones, providing a surge of adrenaline that temporarily masked the physical trauma of my car crash. I nodded, turning my attention to the stylists who approached my bed with quiet reverence. They understood the assignment. This was not a fashion show. I was dressing for battle. They carefully helped me out of the hotel robe, working expertly around the rigid metal halo brace bolted into my skull. The physical pain was excruciating. Every movement sent fire shooting down my nerve endings, but I focused my mind entirely on the image of Marcus boasting to the Vanguard executives. The stylist presented a custom-designed floor-length black evening gown. It was an architectural marvel constructed from heavy structured silk. The dress featured a dramatic, high collar and strategically padded shoulders that perfectly concealed the metallic framework holding my neck in place. A sleek, asymmetrical cape fell from the left shoulder, creating a commanding silhouette that disguised my physical vulnerabilities while amplifying my presence. As they zipped the gown, the heavy fabric settled over my injured body like custom-forged armor. The makeup artist applied a stark, striking look, emphasizing the sharp angles of my cheekbones and giving my eyes a piercing, predatory intensity. A bold, deep crimson lipstick completed the transformation. They helped me grip my aluminum walker, which a technician had quietly wrapped in a matte black finish to match my attire. I caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I did not look like a broken woman who had just survived a horrific car wreck. I looked like the undisputed owner of a $50 million empire ready to reclaim her throne. Vivienne stood beside me, looking at my reflection with a mixture of fierce pride and deep understanding. We were 2 generations of discarded women, standing shoulder to shoulder, preparing to shatter the cycle of exploitation that had enriched the men in our family for decades. Denise stepped forward from the makeshift legal war room. She held out a thick, wax-sealed red envelope. Her expression was solemn and resolute. "This is the final piece of evidence," Maya Denise stated, placing the heavy envelope directly into my hands. "It contains the certified irrefutable proof from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, alongside the unedited video file of Patricia and Lawrence forging your signature in the intensive care unit." Vanguard Tech prides itself on maintaining a pristine corporate image. When you hand this to Chloe's father tonight, you will not just kill the acquisition. You will obliterate Marcus's entire future in the technology sector. I gripped the red envelope tightly, feeling the weight of my own vindication pressing against my palms. I did not hesitate. I secured the envelope in a hidden pocket of my gown and gripped the handles of my black walker. "Let us go," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. We moved as a unified, impenetrable front out of the penthouse suite and down the private elevator. The hotel lobby staff parted ways as we marched toward the exit, their eyes wide at the intimidating procession. Outside, a sleek, extended black limousine idled smoothly against the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the city lights. The driver rushed forward to open the heavy door. Vivian assisted me into the spacious leather interior, and Denise slid into the seat across from us. The doors shut heavily, cutting off the noise of the street. As the limousine pulled away from the curb and headed straight toward the glittering epicenter of the city, where the gala was already underway, my heart pounded a steady, fearless rhythm. Marcus wanted a launch party, and I was about to give him a spectacle that would permanently rewrite our family history. The limousine glided to a seamless halt. In front of the St. Regis, the city's most opulent hotel, the venue was bathed in golden uplighting, projecting an aura of untouchable wealth. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed forward to open the heavy doors. I gripped the handles of my matte black walker and pulled myself up. Every movement sent a jagged spike of fire down my fractured spine, but the custom-structured silk of my gown held me together like iron armor. Aunt Vivian stepped out beside me, her presence a silent, terrifying force, while Denise, our lead litigator, flanked my other side. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the electric buzz of high-stakes corporate networking. Local tech journalists and photographers clustered near the velvet ropes, their camera flashes creating a blinding strobe effect. I did not look away. I kept my chin elevated within the confines of my hidden halo brace, staring straight ahead as the heavy glass doors parted for us. We moved through the gilded lobby and approached the grand ballroom. The double oak doors were already pinned open, revealing a spectacle of staggering excess. Marcus had spared absolutely no expense using my money. A towering champagne pyramid sparkled in the center of the room. Waiters in white gloves circulated with silver trays of caviar and truffles. At the front of the room, positioned beneath a massive digital banner displaying the logo of my stolen application, stood Marcus and Chloe. They were performing their roles flawlessly. Marcus wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo, laughing loudly as he shook hands with top-tier investors. Chloe clung to his arm, draped in a backless silver sequin gown, playing the part of the devoted aristocratic tech wife. She was nodding emphatically at an older white man in a sharp suit, actively working the room to ensure her father's acquisition went off without a hitch. Hovering just behind them were my parents, Patricia and Lawrence. My mother was holding a crystal flute of champagne, practically glowing, as she soaked up the proximity to billionaires. She was chatting animatedly with a group of Vanguard Tech board members, undoubtedly spinning some fabricated tale about our family's long lineage of entrepreneurial brilliance. They looked so comfortable. They looked so completely unbothered by the fact that they had left their daughter paralyzed in an intensive care unit to secure their place in this room. My grip on the walker tightened until my knuckles turned pale. The red envelope hidden in the folds of my dress felt incredibly heavy, a loaded weapon waiting to be fired. I stepped over the threshold of the ballroom. I did not rush. I could not even if I wanted to, but the slow, deliberate pace of my metal walker, striking the polished marble floor, commanded a different kind of attention. The sharp, rhythmic clack of the aluminum legs echoed beneath the low hum of the jazz quartet. One by one, the wealthy attendees turned their heads. Conversations trailed off. Wine glasses paused mid-air. The stark contrast of my imposing architectural black gown and the visible metal halo bolted into my skull created a jarring, inescapable visual. I was a walking, breathing monument to survival entering a room built on fraud. It took exactly 15 seconds for Chloe to spot me. I watched the triumphant smile physically melt off her face. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale and terrified. For a fraction of a second, her eyes darted wildly, searching for the exits, realizing that the woman she had tried to evict from a lakefront estate just hours ago had tracked her down to her most important social conquest. But Chloe was a master of leveraging her status. She immediately masked her panic with aggressive manufactured outrage. She dropped Marcus's arm and marched across the ballroom floor, her silver heels clicking furiously against the marble. "What on earth are you doing here?" Chloe hissed, her voice pitched low but vibrating with absolute fury. She stopped 3 feet away from me, her eyes darting nervously toward the nearby investors to see if they were watching. "I told you to stay at the hospital. You have absolutely no right to crash this event." I stared back at her, my expression completely hollow. "I am attending a celebration for my company, Chloe. I think the primary investor deserves a glass of champagne, do you not agree?" Chloe's face twisted into an ugly snarl. She leaned in closer, attempting to use her physical proximity to intimidate me. "This is not your company, Maya. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter dropout who cannot stand to see her brother succeed. This event is strictly for industry elites and the actual founders. It is not a charity ward for failures." Before I could respond, Patricia and Lawrence rushed over, pushing their way through the murmuring crowd. My mother grabbed Chloe's arm in a show of solidarity, glaring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Maya, you have lost your mind," Patricia hissed, her teeth clenched together to maintain her country club smile for the onlookers. "I cannot believe you would embarrass our family like this. You need to turn around and leave immediately, before I call the psychiatric ward, to have you involuntarily committed. You are obviously having a mental breakdown from your medication." Lawrence stepped forward, trying to use his broad shoulders to block me from the view of the Vanguard executives. "Do not ruin your brother's night," he growled under his breath. "You are going to destroy the Vanguard deal. Get out of here right now before we have you arrested for trespassing." "I am not going anywhere, Dad." Chloe realized words were entirely failing. She snapped her fingers at 2 massive security guards. "Get this woman out of here right now," she demanded. They closed the distance, reaching out to grab my fractured spine. Suddenly, a booming, deeply commanding voice echoed, "Stop right there." The sheer force of that voice froze the security guards mid-step. The heavy, commanding baritone cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom like a scythe. The sea of wealthy investors and tech executives parted instantly, stepping aside with a level of frantic deference that money alone could not buy. It required absolute, terrifying power. Striding through the gap in the crowd was Richard Vanguard. Chloe's father was a titan of the tech industry, a white billionaire whose conglomerate swallowed startups for breakfast, and whose mere presence dictated market trends. He possessed the kind of ruthless, sharp-featured countenance that graced the covers of financial magazines. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that projected impenetrable authority. 2 of his own private security details flanked him, matching his aggressive, unyielding pace. Chloe instantly morphed from a snarling, entitled gatekeeper into a desperate, pampered child. The venom vanished from her face, replaced by a wide-eyed, manipulative pout. She practically tripped over her silver sequin gown as she abandoned Marcus and rushed toward her father. "Daddy," Chloe whined, reaching out to wrap both of her hands around his thick forearm. Her voice was pitched high, playing the ultimate damsel in distress. "Thank God you are here. This woman is completely out of her mind. She is Marcus's bitter sister, and she crashed our launch party just to cause a scene. She is harassing the guests and threatening the security staff. Please tell your men to throw her out so we can finalize the merger in peace." My parents, sensing an opportunity to align themselves with ultimate power, flanked Chloe like loyal subjects. Patricia nodded vigorously, her pearl necklace bouncing against her collarbone. "Mr. Vanguard, please accept our deepest apologies," my mother chimed in, using her most polished, sycophantic tone. "We are so humiliated by this display. Maya is severely medicated and prone to these unfortunate outbursts. We were just instructing the guards to escort her back to the psychiatric ward where she belongs. We will not let her ruin your wonderful evening." Lawrence stood beside my mother, puffing out his chest to appear aligned with the billionaire. "We handle our family problems privately, Richard. My son Marcus has worked too hard to let this distraction affect the acquisition." I remained perfectly still behind my matte black walker. The halo brace kept my head locked in position, but my eyes never left Richard Vanguard. I waited for the inevitable. I waited for the wealthy white billionaire to coddle his spoiled daughter, to snap his fingers, and to have me physically dragged out of the building. That was the reality I had braced myself for. That was the dynamic my family relied upon. But Richard did not snap his fingers. He did not signal his security detail to grab me. Instead, Richard Vanguard stopped walking. He looked down at Chloe's hands clinging desperately to his jacket sleeve. His expression was not one of paternal warmth or protective rage. It was a mask of cold, unadulterated disgust. "Let go of me," Chloe Richard commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried a lethal, freezing edge that made the surrounding guests physically recoil. Chloe blinked, her pout faltering. "Daddy." "I said take your hands off me," he repeated, his tone dropping an octave. With a swift, dismissive motion, Richard physically brushed his daughter's hands away. The rejection was so casual, so profoundly disrespectful, that Chloe actually stumbled backward. She stared at her own father in complete, uncomprehending shock. Patricia and Lawrence froze, the sycophantic smiles dying instantly on their faces. The air in the ballroom seemed to evaporate. Richard Vanguard did not offer my parents a single glance of acknowledgement. He treated them exactly as they were, insignificant obstacles in his path. He stepped around Chloe, moving with deliberate predatory focus. He bypassed my mother. He walked right past my father. He approached Marcus, who was standing frozen beneath the massive digital banner of the application he claimed to have built. Marcus swallowed hard, attempting to project the confidence of a tech founder about to secure a $50 million check. "Sir, I can explain the disruption," Marcus stammered, his voice betraying a pathetic, high-pitched tremor. Richard did not even break his stride. He walked straight past Marcus as if my brother were nothing more than a piece of rented furniture. The billionaire continued across the polished marble floor until he was standing exactly 2 feet in front of me. The towering, powerful executive and the black woman strapped into a surgical halo brace locked eyes. I did not shrink back. I stood as tall as the metal framework would allow, my black silk cape cascading behind me like a shadow. I felt Aunt Vivian and Denise step up to flank me, presenting a unified, impenetrable front of brilliant, lethal women. Richard Vanguard looked at the red envelope tucked discreetly into the fold of my structured gown, then in front of a ballroom filled with the most elite figures in the technology sector. The billionaire did something that completely shattered the reality of everyone watching. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. He reached out his hand toward me, not to dismiss me, but in greeting. "Good evening, Ms. Maya," Richard said, his voice carrying clearly across the dead silent room. "I must sincerely apologize for the inexcusable inconvenience you have experienced tonight. I have spent the last 6 months reviewing the underlying architecture of this software, and I have always wanted to meet the true, undisputed CEO behind this magnificent source code." The silence that slammed into the St. Regis ballroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a catastrophic explosion. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. The waiters stood paralyzed. Every single investor, journalist, and executive stared in total disbelief. But the most satisfying reaction belonged to my family. Chloe looked like she had just been struck by lightning. Her mouth hung open, her perfectly contoured face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Patricia clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes darting frantically between Richard Vanguard and me, unable to process how the daughter she had just labeled a medicated psychiatric patient was currently being addressed as a titan of industry. Lawrence appeared physically sick, his chest heaving as the reality of his financial ruin began to dawn on him. Marcus turned the color of ash. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy realized in real time that his entire empire was an illusion. The $50 million deal, the prestige, the victory over his sister, it was all vanishing right before his eyes. He realized that Vanguard Tech did not want him. They wanted the architect. "Wait!" Marcus stammered, his voice cracking as he stumbled forward, breaking the frozen tableau. His hands waved frantically in the air, a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control of a narrative that was already dead. "Mr. Vanguard, there has been a massive misunderstanding. She is not the CEO. I am the founder. She is just. He choked on his own words, desperately trying to construct a lie that could save him from the executioner's block. But the blade was already falling, and there was absolutely nowhere for him to hide. No, sir, Mr. Vanguard. Marcus choked out his voice, cracking violently as he stumbled forward, nearly tripping over the velvet rope. He held his hands up in a desperate pleading gesture, his eyes wide with frantic panic. Please, you have to listen to me. This is a complete fabrication. She is just an employee, a disgruntled contractor who wrote a few lines of basic code. We fired her months ago because of her psychiatric issues, and now she is trying to extort us. Richard Vanguard did not even blink. He remained perfectly still, his cold, calculating gaze shifting from the sweating face of Marcus back down to me. The billionaire had built an empire by recognizing the difference between a panicked liar and a quiet victor. He was a man who understood the language of absolute power, and he knew instantly that my brother possessed absolutely none of it. Marcus was just a desperate, pathetic hollow fraud. I did not waste a single breath arguing with my brother or defending my sanity. I simply maintained my posture within the rigid confines of my halo brace, looked Richard Vanguard directly in the eye, and allowed a slow Arctic smile to spread across my face. I raised my right hand, lifting 2 fingers into the air. Standing immediately to my left, Denise, my lead corporate litigator, tapped a sequence on her encrypted smartwatch. The effect was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. The massive digital screens dominating the front of the ballroom flickered. The animated logo of the stolen application vanished into dead black pixels. The sudden absence of light drew every eye in the room to the stage. A collective intake of breath echoed through the cavernous space as the screens reignited with a blinding white glare. Displayed across the monitors was a pristine magnified scan of a federal legal document. The United States Patent and Trademark Office seals were unmistakable, glowing brightly in the ballroom. Every investor and journalist stared up at the unalterable truth. In bold print, the documents declared me Maya as the sole owner and architect of the source code, the algorithms, and the complete intellectual property portfolio. The name of Marcus did not exist on a single page. He owned absolutely nothing. A low murmur rippled through the crowd of elites, a sound like a rising tide. But I was not finished. Before Marcus could formulate another desperate lie, the legal documents on the screens dissolved. The ballroom plunged into the sterile, familiar fluorescent lighting of an intensive care unit. It was the hidden camera footage the private investigators of Aunt Vivian had secured from the hospital. The timestamp glowing in the top right corner displayed a date from just days ago, a time when I was lying in a coma with a fractured spine. The audio kicked in, feeding directly through the state-of-the-art surround sound system of the ballroom. The rhythmic, agonizing beep of my heart monitor filled the elegant space, an eerie, haunting soundtrack to the unfolding horror. Then the footage showed 2 figures stepping into the frame, Patricia and Lawrence, my parents. They were standing over my unconscious, broken body. They were not weeping. They were not holding my hand. They were holding a clipboard and a blue ink pen. Just hold her wrist steady, so the signature matches her usual slant. The voice of my father boomed through the ballroom speakers, crisp and devastatingly clear. The entire crowd of billionaires and socialites froze in absolute shock. On the screen, Lawrence physically grabbed my limp, comatose hand, wrapping my paralyzed fingers around the pen to force a signature onto the fraudulent intellectual property transfer agreement. The voice of my mother followed, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Her tone was annoyed, completely devoid of any maternal concern. "I cannot believe we are missing the champagne toast for this," Patricia complained on the recording, rolling her eyes at her reflection in the window. "Hurry up, Lawrence. The girl is not going anywhere, but the father of Chloe is waiting at the resort. If we do not get this signed tonight, Marcus loses the 50 million. The video captured them pressing my thumb onto a notary pad, sealing their felony fraud before tossing the clipboard into a designer bag and walking out of the room, leaving me to the rhythmic beeping of the machines. The screen went black. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the undeniable, grotesque reality of what the entire room had just witnessed. Then the ballroom exploded. It was absolute chaos. The polite murmurs of the corporate elite shattered into loud, outraged gasps and shouted questions. Tech journalists, realizing they were standing in the epicenter of a massive corporate fraud scandal, scrambled to pull out their professional cameras. The blinding flash of photography lit up the room like a lightning storm. Reporters began shouting questions, their voices overlapping in a frantic frenzy to capture the destruction of the golden boy. Investors who had been laughing with Marcus just 5 minutes ago physically backed away from him, retreating as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. The security detail of Richard Vanguard immediately stepped forward, forming a protective barrier around the billionaire, shielding him from the imploding family on the stage. Marcus staggered backward, his hands gripping his hair, his eyes darting wildly around the room as camera flashes captured his total annihilation. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. Chloe was hyperventilating, pressing her hands against her temples, realizing that her entire social standing, her marriage, and her unearned wealth had just been broadcast as a criminal conspiracy to the wealthiest people in the city. The sheer volume of the murmuring crowd, the clicking of cameras, and the ringing of phones created a deafening roar. My father, Lawrence, looked physically ill, his chest heaving as he stared at the blank screens, the realization of impending federal prison time locking his knees into place. But Patricia could not handle the exposure. The woman who had spent 32 years manipulating her image, who had curated a flawless country club facade built on my silent suffering, completely snapped. The mask of the elegant, refined matriarch shattered into a million jagged pieces. Patricia shoved her way past a group of stunned investors, her face contorted into an ugly feral mask of pure rage. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face, her voice tearing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom with a raw, unhinged shriek. "It is a fake!" Patricia screamed at the top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing violently off the walls. "You ungrateful bitch!" The echo of my mother's desperate, shrill scream died against the cold marble walls of the St. Regis ballroom. Patricia stood there, her chest heaving, pointing a trembling finger at the massive digital screens that had just broadcast her committing a felony. "It is a fake," she repeated, but her voice cracked, lacking the absolute authority she had wielded over me my entire life. Nobody was looking at Patricia. Every single eye in that room of billionaires and tech elites was locked onto Richard Vanguard. The white billionaire's face had transformed from a mask of composed authority into a terrifying portrait of pure, unadulterated rage. A deep, violent shade of crimson crept up his neck, staining his collar and flushing his sharp features. The veins at his temples pulsed visibly under the harsh ballroom lighting. He was a man who commanded global markets, a man who destroyed competitors before breakfast. And he had just realized that a mediocre, arrogant fraud had brought him onto a public stage to make him look like an absolute fool. Richard turned, his imposing frame slowly moving with the lethal precision of an apex predator. He locked his eyes onto Marcus. My brother physically shrank. The velvet tuxedo that had looked so bespoke and powerful just minutes ago now hung on him like a cheap costume. Marcus took a pathetic, stumbling step backward, raising his hands in a weak gesture of surrender. "You tried to sell me a stolen company?" Richard's voice was a low, guttural growl that resonated through the dead silent ballroom. It was not a question. It was a death sentence. "Do you take me for a fool, Marcus? Do you honestly believe you could forge a legal transfer of intellectual property paraded into my boardroom and walk away with $50 million of my capital?" "Sir, please," Marcus begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whimper. "The optics are bad, but I can explain the internal family dispute. The code was a joint effort. My parents can testify to the agreement." Richard Vanguard took one step forward, closing the distance. The sheer intimidation factor forced Marcus to drop his gaze to the floor. "There is no $50 million buyout," Richard announced, his voice booming so loudly it made the crystal champagne flutes on the nearby tables rattle. "I am canceling the entire acquisition, effective immediately. Every single contract, every letter of intent, every shred of association between Vanguard Tech Innovations and you is permanently terminated. Furthermore, I am directing my legal team to file immediate federal charges against you for corporate fraud, wire fraud, and attempting to solicit capital under criminally false pretenses." I will personally see to it that you never work in the technology sector or any other sector ever again. You are finished." The word slammed into Marcus like a physical blow. His knees buckled and he collapsed against the edge of the champagne pyramid table, sending a few glasses crashing to the floor. His empire was gone. His reputation was ashes. But the humiliation was far from over. Chloe had been standing frozen beside the velvet ropes, her mind frantically trying to process the magnitude of the disaster. She had married Marcus for the status. She had bullied me, mocked my broken spine, and tried to kick me out of my own lakefront estate because she believed she was securing her place as a $50 million tech royalty wife. Now she realized she was married to a broke, soon-to-be convicted felon, and her own father was the one orchestrating the execution. Worse, she was directly implicated. She had been the one pushing her father's board of directors to bypass standard due diligence. She was the one parading around as the co-founder's wife. Chloe let out a visceral, piercing shriek. It was not a cry of sorrow. It was the sound of a spoiled, entitled woman watching her unearned wealth evaporate. She lunged forward, her silver sequin gown catching the harsh light of the media cameras. She grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, hauling him upright. "You told me you owned the company!" Chloe screamed, her face contorted into an ugly, feral mask. Spittle flew from her lips as she shook him violently. "You told me she was just a hired contractor. You promised me the 50 million. Chloe, babe, wait." Marcus pleaded, trying to pry her manicured hands off his jacket. "We can fix this. I can talk to your dad." Chloe did not let him finish. She pulled her right arm back and delivered a vicious, open-handed slap directly across Marcus's face. The sharp crack of skin on skin echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Marcus stumbled sideways, clutching his rapidly bruising cheek, completely stunned by the physical assault. "You lying piece of trash!" Chloe shrieked, striking him again, her heavy diamond engagement ring tearing a small cut across his jawline. "You dragged my name into your pathetic criminal family drama. You made my father look stupid in front of his entire board. I am filing for divorce tonight. I am taking whatever you have left, and I am watching you rot in federal prison." The total collapse of their golden boy was too much for Patricia and Lawrence to bear. Seeing Marcus, bleeding, sobbing, and being publicly humiliated by his white wife snapped my parents out of their paralyzed shock. The facade of the elegant black elite family completely disintegrated. "Get your hands off my son!" Patricia yelled, hiking up the skirt of her designer gown as she sprinted toward the stage. Lawrence was right behind her, his face red with a mixture of panic and protective rage. They had sacrificed everything, including my life, to elevate Marcus. They could not watch him be destroyed, but they never even made it to the platform, before Patricia or Lawrence could reach Chloe. Richard Vanguard snapped his fingers. His private security detail, a wall of massive, highly trained men in dark suits, immediately stepped forward. They intercepted my parents with ruthless efficiency. One guard planted a heavy hand squarely in the center of Lawrence's chest, shoving my father backward with enough force to send him crashing into a cocktail table. Another guard stepped directly into Patricia's path, raising a massive arm to block her frantic advance. "Let me through," Patricia shrieked, clawing fruitlessly at the security guard's impenetrable suit. "You cannot do this. He is our son. We have a legal agreement." "Remove them from the premises," Richard Vanguard ordered, not even bothering to look at my parents. His tone was dismissive, treating them like vermin that had infested his event. "Hand them over to the local authorities for the forgery confession broadcast on those screens." The security guards moved aggressively, grabbing Lawrence by the arms and twisting them behind his back. My father struggled, shouting indignantly about his rights, but he was completely overpowered. Patricia wailed, her flawless hair coming undone, looking absolutely deranged as a guard physically restrained her. I stood behind my matte black walker, flanked by my lead corporate litigator, watching the absolute destruction of the people who had abandoned me in the intensive care unit. They were losing their money, their freedom, and their precious social standing all at once. The reporters were having a field day, their camera flashes turning the ballroom into a chaotic, blinding lightning storm of public ruin. Marcus was weeping on the floor. Chloe was screaming at the top of her lungs. My parents were being manhandled by security. It was a symphony of absolute, undeniable justice. But the night was not over. The ultimate reckoning had not yet arrived. Right as the chaos reached its absolute deafening peak, as the security guards dragged my kicking, screaming mother toward the exit, a heavy, resonating boom echoed from the back of the room. The massive, solid oak main doors of the grand ballroom burst open once again, hitting the walls with a violent, resounding crash that instantly silenced the screaming room. Every head in the St. Regis ballroom snapped toward the entrance. Through the threshold stepped a woman who commanded the very atmosphere of the room. It was Aunt Vivienne. She wore an immaculate, razor-sharp white tailored suit that gleamed under the chandeliers, radiating a blinding, untouchable authority. Her silver hair was pulled back into that same severe, elegant chignon, but tonight she wore the aura of a reigning monarch stepping onto a conquered battlefield. Flanking her was an absolute phalanx of elite Wall Street attorneys. 5 men and women in impeccably cut dark suits walked a half-step behind her, carrying thick leather briefcases and projecting an air of total legal annihilation. They moved as a single terrifying unit. The sea of billionaires, journalists, and tech executives instinctively parted, creating a wide, clear path for her. Nobody dared to breathe. The oppressive, chaotic energy that had just consumed the room was entirely extinguished, replaced by a suffocating, reverent awe. Vivienne did not rush. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the steady, rhythmic precision of a ticking time bomb. I stood behind my matte black walker, flanked by Denise, feeling a fierce, swelling pride in my chest. The cavalry had not just arrived. The queen had taken the board. Vivienne glided past the bewildered vanguard executives and stopped directly in front of the stage. She ignored the sobbing Chloe. She ignored Marcus, who was still bleeding on the floor. She locked her piercing, unyielding gaze entirely onto my father. Lawrence was trembling. The broad-shouldered, arrogant patriarch who had tried to bully me in my hospital room was physically shaking. His hands trembled at his sides. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a fragile, terrified old man. He recognized his older sister instantly, and the 20 years of lies he had built his reputation on suddenly wrapped around his throat like a noose. "Hello, brother," Vivienne said. Her voice was smooth, melodic, and devastatingly lethal. It carried clearly across the silent ballroom, ensuring every single member of the high society elite heard her. "You look a bit pale. I suppose the stress of committing felony fraud in an intensive care unit takes a toll on the complexion." Lawrence opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak emerged. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape that did not exist. "It seems you have been entirely too busy forging signatures to check this morning's financial news." Vivienne continued, stepping one pace closer. "If you had bothered to read the market reports instead of drinking my niece's champagne, you would have realized that your little scheme was dead before you even walked into this building tonight." Patricia, still struggling in the grip of the security guards, let out a confused, panicked whimper. "What are you talking about?" my mother gasped. "You have nothing to do with this. You are an outcast. You have no power here." Vivienne did not even grant my mother the dignity of a glance. She simply turned her attention away from her trembling brother and pivoted directly toward Richard Vanguard. The imposing white billionaire who had just systematically dismantled Marcus squared his shoulders. But as Richard looked at Vivienne, the hostile, predatory glare on his face vanished. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed rapidly by an expression of profound, undeniable submission. "Mr. Vanguard," Vivienne said, her tone shifting from familial disgust to corporate absolute zero. "We have a pending matter regarding the hostile takeover of your manufacturing subsidiaries." Richard swallowed hard. "Yes, Madam Chairwoman. My board received the filings this afternoon." Chloe, who was still kneeling on the floor near Marcus, let out a bewildered, hysterical gasp. "Daddy, what are you doing?" Chloe shrieked, scrambling to her feet. "Why are you talking to her like that? Tell your guards to throw her out. She is just Maya's crazy aunt." "Shut your mouth, Chloe!" Richard barked, the sheer ferocity of his voice making his daughter flinch. "Do not speak another word. You have already caused enough damage today." Richard turned back to Vivienne, and to the absolute astonishment of every single person in the ballroom, the billionaire bowed his head. It was a crisp, formal, and entirely submissive gesture of profound respect. He recognized that he was standing in the presence of an apex predator whose financial reach eclipsed his own. I apologize for my daughter's insolence, Madam Chairwoman, Richard said, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. I assure you, Vanguard Tech Innovations had absolutely no knowledge of the fraudulent nature of this acquisition. We were misled by Marcus and his family. I would ask that this unfortunate incident does not impact our ongoing negotiations regarding your firm's buyout of my enterprise. The collective gasp from my family was audible. Patricia slumped against the security guard holding her. Lawrence let out a ragged, wheezing breath. Marcus buried his face in his hands, weeping openly onto the marble floor. They finally understood the catastrophic magnitude of their mistake. They had not just wronged the daughter they deemed expendable. They had not just tried to steal a $50 million application. They had unknowingly waged war against the unseen architect of the entire financial ecosystem they worshipped. Vivian was the venture capital phantom who was currently buying out the very billionaire they had tried to impress. They had provoked the ultimate boss, and she was standing right in front of them holding all the cards. I am afraid the negotiations are over, Richard Vivian stated coldly. You allowed a team of incompetent frauds into your boardroom because you failed to do basic due diligence on a black woman's intellectual property. My firm will be proceeding with the hostile takeover of your entire conglomerate. You will be stepping down as CEO effective immediately, or I will publicly gut your stock valuation by morning. Do we have an understanding? Richard Vanguard closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging in total defeat. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, we have an understanding. Chloe let out a long, high-pitched wail of absolute despair, dropping back to her knees as her father's empire was stripped away in front of her eyes. She had lost her husband, her reputation, and her inheritance, all in the span of 10 minutes. Vivienne turned back to my parents. Lawrence and Patricia were staring at her with wide, horrified eyes, looking like prey caught in a steel trap. The arrogance, the entitlement, the generational narcissism had been completely eradicated. They were hollow, terrified shells. 20 years ago, you stole my legacy to build your pathetic little life, Lawrence Vivian said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, vibrating whisper that promised total annihilation. You threw me out of this family, and you spent decades trying to do the exact same thing to Maya. You thought you could use the women in your bloodline as stepping stones and face zero consequences. Vivian raised her hand, and the lead attorney from her Wall Street team stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of legal briefs from his leather case. I promised myself I would let you live in your mediocrity. Vivian continued, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. But you touched my niece. You left her broken in a hospital bed to steal her brilliance, and for that I am going to make you bleed. My legal team is filing a civil suit for intellectual property theft, forgery, and emotional distress. I am freezing every single asset you possess. I am coming for your house. I am coming for your cars. I am coming for your retirement accounts. I am going to sue this family for every last penny you have to your names, and I will not stop until you are entirely permanently destitute. The morning sun offered no warmth to the shattered remnants of my family as they fled the smoldering wreckage of the St. Regis Gala. Panic had entirely consumed them. By dawn, the reality of Aunt Vivian's threat had materialized into a terrifying countdown. The asset freeze was imminent. Within hours, federal injunctions would lock every bank account, seize every investment portfolio, and invalidate every credit line bearing their names. They had a singular, desperate window to secure untraceable wealth before the digital guillotine dropped. Their destination was the only place they believed still held liquid assets they could physically carry: my lakefront estate. Marcus drove his leased sports car recklessly up my private driveway, tearing through the pristine landscaping. He sprinted into the foyer, his once immaculate velvet tuxedo now stained and rumpled. Patricia and Lawrence stumbled in right behind him, their faces pale and slick with terrified sweat. Chloe pushed past my mother and bolted straight for the grand staircase. The sprawling house instantly devolved into a chaotic war zone. Marcus tore through the hallways, making a direct line for the master study, where I kept a heavy floor safe. He ripped paintings off the walls and hurled books across the room. When that failed, he grabbed a heavy brass bookend and began violently smashing it against the digital keypad of the safe, grunting with feral desperation. Lawrence paced frantically in the adjacent corridor, his hands clutching a garbage bag he was hurriedly stuffing with my silver serving pieces. "We need cash!" Lawrence yelled, his voice cracking under the strain of his impending ruin. Patricia grabbed the watches. "Grab anything we can pawn. If Vivian's lawyers freeze the offshore accounts before noon, we will not even have money for a defense attorney. We need enough to get a private flight out of the country today." Patricia was frantically pulling expensive electronics from the entertainment center, her manicured nails chipping. "I sacrificed my entire social standing for this." Patricia shrieked, tears of sheer panic ruining her makeup. "I protected you from your own failures, Lawrence. I enabled Marcus because you swore he was a visionary. I told Maya she was worthless her entire life just to keep her self-esteem low enough so she would keep funding our lifestyle. And now I am stealing televisions like a common criminal to avoid federal prison." Upstairs, the sound of glass shattering echoed loudly. Chloe was ransacking the guest suites where she had ordered the movers to dump her designer bags and couture clothing. "You promised me $50 million. Chloe screamed down the staircase, hurling a heavy velvet jewelry box over the railing. It struck the marble floor, scattering diamonds and pearls everywhere. "You are a pathetic, useless fraud, Marcus. I am taking every single piece of jewelry in this house, and I am leaving you to rot in a federal cell. I deserve compensation for marrying a fake." Marcus dropped the dented brass bookend, his hands bleeding from his frantic attempts to breach my safe. He stormed out of the study, his face contorted in an ugly sneer. "You deserve nothing," he roared back at his wife. "You are the one who pushed me to forge the transfer agreement in the intensive care unit. You told me the Vanguard board would never look too closely. You are just as guilty as we are. If I go down for corporate fraud, I am taking you right down with me. You think your white privilege will shield you from the commission when they see your emails." The house was a symphony of mutual destruction. The elite family had completely cannibalized itself the second their unearned wealth was threatened. Lawrence and Patricia turned on each other, screaming about past financial mistakes and hidden debts now rising to the surface. Patricia blamed Lawrence for using my corporate accounts to fund his failed real estate ventures years ago. Lawrence blamed Patricia for pushing Marcus into the technology sector when he barely possessed the intelligence to manage a spreadsheet. They were cornered rats, tearing each other apart in my living room, stripped of their polished facade. The family loyalty they had weaponized against me dissolved the instant the money disappeared. Marcus finally gave up on the impenetrable safe. He scrambled across the floor, frantically scooping up the scattered diamonds and pearls Chloe had thrown from the balcony, shoving them into the pockets of his torn tuxedo jacket. "We have to go," Marcus yelled, his eyes wide and manic. "The banks open in 20 minutes. If we do not wire the remaining balance from the shell company now, Vivian will lock it down. Get the bags. Move." Chloe came stomping down the grand staircase, dragging two massive canvas duffel bags bulging with stolen goods. Patricia and Lawrence hoisted their garbage bags full of my stolen property, their chests heaving, their faces flushed with terrified adrenaline. They congregated in the foyer, a pathetic crew of thieves ready to make their desperate escape before the authorities arrived. Marcus grabbed the handle of his overflowing duffel bag, his breathing ragged. He turned toward the arched entryway leading to the main living room. He took exactly 3 hurried steps into the bright space and froze. His shoes halted abruptly. The heavy duffel bag slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor with a thud. Chloe, Patricia, and Lawrence crashed into his back, letting out startled gasps as they followed his paralyzed gaze. Seated comfortably on the custom velvet sofa they had previously ordered the movers to remove were 2 women. I was positioned carefully in the center, my posture rigid within the metallic framework of my halo brace. Sitting right beside me, legs elegantly crossed, was Aunt Vivienne. Between us, on the low glass coffee table, rested a delicate porcelain tea set and a thick stack of legal documents. I picked up my teacup, took a slow sip, and offered my shocked family a welcoming smile as the trap closed perfectly around them. "Welcome to my home," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy, suffocated silence of the living room. I set my teacup back onto its matching porcelain saucer with a sharp, definitive clink. "I see you found the jewelry collection you were looking for, Marcus. Though I must say, stuffing my pearls into a cheap canvas duffel bag lacks a certain level of sophistication." Marcus stood paralyzed, his bruised and bleeding hands still clutching the velvet bags he had looted from my upstairs suite. Chloe let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, dropping her own bags to the floor, as if they had suddenly caught fire. Patricia and Lawrence remained frozen in the arched entryway, the garbage bags full of my silver serving pieces dangling from their trembling fingers. They had rushed here thinking they could pillage my sanctuary before the authorities caught up with them. They never anticipated that the architect of their destruction would be sitting comfortably on the sofa waiting to personally oversee their execution. From the shadows of the adjacent formal dining room, Denise stepped forward. My lead corporate litigator moved with the calm, lethal precision of a predator closing in on its trapped prey. She walked directly to the glass coffee table carrying a thick bound stack of legal documents. She did not hand them to my family. She dropped them onto the glass surface with a heavy, resounding thud that made my mother physically flinch. "What is this?" Lawrence choked out his voice, barely a whisper. His eyes darted frantically toward the exits, calculating an escape route that simply did not exist. "Those are the consequences of your limitless greed," Denise stated, her tone sharp and uncompromising. "While your daughter was fighting for her life on a ventilator, you did not just forge a transfer agreement for her intellectual property. You used that same fraudulent notary to execute a comprehensive power of attorney. You leveraged this exact lakefront estate alongside your own primary family residence, taking out a massive, high-interest commercial loan to quietly cover Marcus's mounting corporate debts before the Vanguard acquisition. You mortgaged her home to fund his illusions." My parents stared at the paperwork in absolute paralyzing horror. Patricia clutched her chest, her breath coming in short, erratic gasps. "You thought you were dealing with a faceless commercial bank?" Aunt Vivian interjected, leaning forward slightly on the velvet sofa. "You assumed you could hide the fraudulent liens in a maze of shell companies. But you forgot what I do for a living, Lawrence. My analysts flag unusual institutional debt transfers every single morning. The moment your fraudulent loan was approved, my firm purchased the debt outright. We bought the paper on both this estate and your primary residence." I gripped the aluminum handles of my black walker, keeping my gaze locked entirely on my father, and because the loan was secured through documented felony fraud, I triggered the immediate acceleration clause at 6 o'clock this morning. I explained, my voice devoid of any warmth. "The entire balance is due immediately. You do not have the liquid capital to cover a fraction of it. You have officially defaulted." Marcus let out a loud, desperate sob, sinking to his knees on the marble floor of the foyer. The stolen diamonds spilled from his pockets, scattering across the entryway like worthless glass. He was completely, irrevocably ruined. As if perfectly synchronized with his collapse, a heavy, authoritative pounding echoed against the mahogany front doors. The doors had been left wide open during their frantic rush to loot the house. Stepping into the foyer was the local county sheriff, fully uniformed, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. Flanking him were two armed deputies. Lawrence Anderson, the sheriff, announced, his stern gaze sweeping over the pathetic group of thieves gathered in my entryway. "I hold an emergency eviction and asset seizure mandate authorized by a federal judge. Due to the ongoing criminal investigation into felony wire fraud and grand larceny, this property and your primary residence are now under the complete jurisdiction of the primary lien holder. You are ordered to vacate the premises immediately. Drop the bags." The deputies stepped forward, pulling the garbage bags of stolen silver from my parents' limp hands. Chloe backed away against the wall, her hands raised in the air, frantically trying to distance herself from the family she had eagerly married into for wealth. The reality of their total annihilation finally broke Patricia. The carefully constructed facade of the elite, untouchable matriarch shattered completely. She fell to her knees right beside Marcus, her designer dress pooling around her on the hardwood floor. She crawled forward, ignoring the presence of the law enforcement officers, reaching her trembling hands out toward my medical walker. "Maya, please!" Patricia wailed, heavy tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "You cannot do this. You cannot throw us out on the street. We will have absolutely nothing. We will be homeless. We are your parents. We gave you life. Bloodlines matter, Maya. Family comes first. You have to show mercy to your own family." Lawrence dropped to his knees right beside her, abandoning every shred of his patriarchal arrogance. He clasped his hands together, weeping openly. Please, Maya. We made a terrible mistake. We were blinded by the pressure. But you are a good daughter. You have a good heart. You cannot leave us destitute. We are begging you. I stared down at the two people who had created me. I looked at the tears streaming down their faces, listening to their desperate, pathetic pleas for familial loyalty. They were weaponizing the very concept of family they had completely disregarded when it suited their financial ambitions. They expected my fundamental decency to override their catastrophic betrayal. I did not smile. I did not yell. I braced my weight firmly against my walker and forced myself to stand up completely straight, the halo brace locking my gaze downward at their kneeling forms. I reached into the hidden pocket of my structured black gown. I pulled out a single crumpled piece of paper. It was not a legal document or a bank statement. It was the original itemized intensive care unit admission chart from the exact morning my spine was crushed in the collision. The edges of the paper were deeply stained with the dried dark brown blood from my own traumatic injuries. I let the paper slip from my fingers. It fluttered through the tense air, landing gently on the glass coffee table right next to my porcelain teacup. Family died at 7:30 in the morning. I said, my voice echoing like a final, unalterable judgment. You have exactly 30 minutes to get off my property. Patricia stared at the blood-stained hospital admission chart resting on the glass table. The finality of my words struck her like a physical blow. The domineering matriarch who had controlled every family narrative, who had weaponized my mental health and exploited my finances for decades, was instantly reduced to a sobbing, shivering mess on my foyer floor. Lawrence knelt beside her, his broad shoulders slumped in utter, irreversible defeat. They had absolutely nothing left to say. The ultimate trump card of family loyalty had been completely incinerated by the undeniable, tangible proof of their own calculated cruelty. Before the heavy silence could fully settle over the living room, the sharp, rhythmic clack of high heels echoed from the grand staircase. Chloe descended the marble steps. She was no longer frantic or hysterical. She had swapped her ruined gala gown for a sleek, tailored beige trench coat, large designer sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the reality of her ruined marriage. Behind her, two hired private movers. She must have called in secret lugged massive steamer trunks filled with her couture clothing and expensive handbags. She walked with the cold, practiced detachment of a woman who had already excised this family from her elite social registry. She did not even glance at Patricia or Lawrence. She treated my parents as if they were part of the architecture, stepping expertly around my mother, who was still pooling on the floor. Chloe marched directly toward Marcus, who was still kneeling amid the scattered pearls and shattered pride in the entryway. Marcus looked up at his wife, a pathetic, desperate glimmer of hope flashing in his bloodshot eyes. "Chloe, babe," he rasped, reaching out a trembling, bleeding hand toward the hem of her coat. "We can figure this out. Your dad can loan us the money to pay off the commercial loan. We can start over somewhere else." Chloe did not offer him her hand. Instead, she reached into her pristine leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavily bound legal dossier. With a swift, violent motion, she slammed the heavy folder directly into Marcus's chest. The impact knocked him backward onto the hardwood floor, the document spilling across his lap in a chaotic mess of white paper. "Those are your divorce papers," Chloe stated, her voice sharp, mechanical, and entirely devoid of any warmth. "I had my father's legal team draft them the second we left the hotel ballroom. You will find that I am claiming absolute fault on your end. I am also filing a massive civil suit for the total destruction of my public reputation. You humiliated me in front of the Vanguard board. You made me look like an accomplice to a pathetic amateur fraud ring. I am taking the cars, the offshore accounts you hid from your parents, and I am demanding punitive damages for the severe emotional distress of being publicly associated with a criminal." Marcus stared at the scattered divorce papers in sheer disbelief. "Chloe, you cannot do this to me. You knew about the forgery in the hospital. You told me to do it. You said the board would never check the signatures." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "I told you to secure your funding, Marcus. I never told you to be stupid enough to forge a federal document in an intensive care unit and leave a digital trail that a first-year law student could uncover. You are a massive liability, and I do not associate with liabilities. Do not ever attempt to contact me or my family again. She stepped directly over his legs, completely unbothered by his loud sobbing, and walked toward the open mahogany front doors. The private movers followed closely behind her, carrying the last remnants of her fraudulent tech wife persona. But as Chloe crossed the threshold, stepping out onto the sunlit porch, a sudden blinding flash of red and blue strobe lights illuminated the paved driveway. The wailing, piercing chirp of a police siren cut through the humid afternoon air. 3 marked county sheriff cruisers and 2 unmarked black sedans swerved violently onto the property, boxing in Marcus's leased sports car and the moving truck. The heavy car doors flew open, and half a dozen uniformed officers, accompanied by 2 plainclothes detectives, swarmed the grand entrance of my estate. Chloe froze, pressing herself tightly against a stone pillar to avoid the aggressive rush of law enforcement. The lead detective, a tall, imposing white man holding a thick stack of warrants, marched straight through the open doors and stepped into my foyer. Marcus Anderson, the detective, announced, his voice booming with absolute, undeniable authority. Marcus scrambled backward, his hands slipping on the scattered jewelry, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "No, wait, please. It is a mistake." The officers did not wait. 2 uniforms grabbed him by the arms, hauling him roughly to his feet. He cried out in physical pain as they twisted his arms behind his back, the sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing loudly in the entryway. "You are under arrest for felony forgery, corporate wire fraud, and grand larceny." The detective recited, his expression bored and highly professional. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus thrashed wildly against the officers, his perfectly groomed image completely destroyed. He looked like a wild, terrified animal caught in a trap. "Mom. Dad, do something," he shrieked, tears and mucus streaming down his face. "Call a lawyer right now. Tell them it was your idea. Tell them you held her hand in the hospital bed. Tell them the truth." Patricia let out a guttural, primal scream. The sight of her golden boy, the beloved son she had sacrificed my entire life to elevate, being dragged out in steel chains, completely broke whatever fragile sanity she had left. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sheriff's stern warning, and lunged desperately toward the arresting officers. "Get your hands off my son!" Patricia wailed, clawing frantically at the officers' tactical vests. "He is a good boy. He is a successful executive. It was a simple misunderstanding." "Maya, tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave him the company. Please, Maya." I did not speak. I simply stood behind my black aluminum walker, flanked by Aunt Vivian and Denise, watching the inevitable, magnificent consequences of their own actions completely crush them. The officers easily shoved Patricia aside. They dragged Marcus out the front doors and down the wide porch steps. Lawrence stood paralyzed in the foyer, watching his entire legacy evaporate, completely incapable of stepping forward to protect his wife or his son. He was a coward, exposed and permanently broken. Patricia scrambled after the officers, her bare knees scraping against the rough pavement of the driveway. She threw herself against the side of the police cruiser as they shoved Marcus into the back seat. She pounded her fists against the reinforced glass, screaming his name, sobbing hysterically, as the wealthy neighbors from the surrounding estates stepped out of their mansions to watch the elite Anderson family be publicly hauled away like common criminals. Vivian's security team moved in with ruthless efficiency, guiding Lawrence firmly out the front door and depositing him on the driveway beside his hysterical wife. The eviction was absolute and complete. They were officially locked out of my life. I moved slowly, deliberately, navigating my walker through the foyer and stepping out onto the expansive, elevated front balcony overlooking the driveway. The warm breeze caught the heavy silk cape of my black gown. I stood tall, resting my hands on the metal frame, and looked down at the scene below. Chloe was sprinting down the street in her designer heels, abandoning her luggage just to escape the media circus. The police cruisers threw their sirens on, the deafening wail signaling the end of Marcus's freedom. The cars accelerated down the driveway, leaving Patricia sobbing in the dirt, clutching her chest, while Lawrence stood beside her, staring blankly at the empty space where their stolen wealth used to be. I watched them shrink into the distance, my posture rigid, my spine fractured, but my spirit completely unbreakable. 3 months evaporated into the crisp autumn air as I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the federal courthouse. The satisfying rhythmic clack of my heels against the concrete steps was a sound I had dreamed of during those long, agonizing weeks of physical therapy. My aluminum walker was gone. The rigid halo brace that had bolted my skull in place was a thing of the past. My spine was completely healed, reinforced by titanium and fueled by absolute vindication. Behind those towering brass doors, federal judge had just delivered the final devastating blow. Marcus was officially sentenced to 72 months in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, corporate espionage, and forgery. There were no last-minute plea deals. There was no leniency for the golden boy who thought his privilege made him untouchable. The judge had looked right through his pathetic weeping apologies and handed down a maximum sentence. Chloe had successfully and ruthlessly severed herself from his sinking ship, taking half of whatever liquid assets he had hidden and leaving him to face the crushing reality of federal prison entirely alone. As for my parents, the financial fallout had been absolute and apocalyptic. The commercial loans I accelerated stripped them of every single luxury they had ever known. They were evicted from their pristine suburban mansion and forced to relocate to a decaying, cramped apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The prestigious country club memberships were publicly revoked. Their wealthy friends immediately blocked their numbers. The elite society they had sacrificed my sanity to impress exiled them, treating their names like a contagious disease. They had nothing left but the crushing weight of their own irrelevance and the bitter consequences of their greed. I took a deep breath of the fresh, unburdened air, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored emerald suit before I could descend the courthouse steps to meet my transportation. A hollow, frantic voice called out my name. I turned to see Patricia stepping out from the shadow of the massive stone pillars. The sight of my mother was genuinely jarring. The immaculate pearl-wearing matriarch who had dominated my childhood and terrorized my adulthood was entirely gone. In her place stood a haggard, shrinking, defeated woman. Her expensive designer clothes had been replaced by a faded, ill-fitting trench coat that hung loosely over her frail frame. The stress of impending poverty and her precious son's incarceration had carved deep, unforgiving lines into her face. She looked desperate, feral, and completely stripped of her aristocratic armor. She blocked my path, her eyes bloodshot and filled with a toxic, impotent rage that she could no longer hide behind fake smiles. "You did this!" Patricia hissed, her voice shaking violently as she pointed a bony, trembling finger directly at my chest. "You put your own brother in a cage. You threw us into the gutter. You destroyed our family. You took everything from us, just to satisfy your own sick, selfish ego." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step back. I looked at the woman who had happily abandoned me in an intensive care unit to secure a paycheck. The woman who had forged my signature while a machine breathed for me. "You destroyed yourselves, Mom," I said, my voice carrying the calm, absolute authority of a woman who had survived the fire and learned how to control the flames. "I just handed you the mirror so you could finally see the monsters you really are." Patricia's face twisted into an ugly, desperate snarl. The truth was too heavy for her to carry, so she resorted to the only weapon she had left, her venom. "You think you won?" she spat, taking an aggressive step closer, her breath smelling of stale coffee and bitter defeat. "You have all that money, all that corporate power, but you are entirely empty inside. You are going to die completely alone. Maya, no one will ever truly love a cold-blooded, ruthless bitch like you." A year ago, those exact words would have shattered me into a million pieces. They would have sent me spiraling into a deep, anxious depression, desperate to prove my worth to a woman who was biologically incapable of loving me. Now they sounded like the pathetic, meaningless ramblings of a defeated ghost. I did not feel a single ounce of anger. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of pity. "I am not alone," I replied, keeping my gaze locked on her frantic, watering eyes. "I am just clearing out the trash so I can make room for the people who actually deserve a seat at my table." Patricia recoiled as if I had physically struck her across the face. Her mouth opened, but she had absolutely no ammunition left. Her narrative had completely failed, and her control over my emotional state was permanently severed. Right on cue, a sleek black Bentley glided up to the curb. The rear door swung open and Aunt Vivian stepped out, looking like the undisputed architect of the financial district in a sharp charcoal blazer. Behind her sat Denise and the rest of my corporate team. They were smiling. They were waiting for me. This was my real family. A family forged in mutual respect, ambition, and loyalty. I did not give my mother another second of my time. I turned my back on her and walked down the steps. My posture was flawless. Every step I took was a testament to my survival, a physical rejection of the generational curse that had tried to bury me. I slid into the interior of the Bentley, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the powerful women who had helped me burn the fraudulent empire to the ground. As the car pulled away and merged into the city traffic, I did not look back at the broken woman. The toxic legacy of Patricia and Lawrence Anderson was dead, and my new empire was just beginning. The ultimate lesson from this story is that true family is defined by genuine support, not bloodlines. When those closest to you exploit your loyalty and abandon you during your darkest moments, you have the absolute right to walk away. You do not owe your success, wealth, or peace of mind to people who use you as a stepping stone. Healing begins when you stop seeking validation from toxic relatives and recognize your own worth. Reclaiming your power is not selfish, it is absolute survival. Have you ever cut ties with toxic relatives? Share your story below and subscribe today.